to why now we are delving into the political economy of urban labor as such, while we have already talked about, why informal labor comes into place, what are the process through which that mass reserve or people out of work are managed or excluded, and in the ways, progressive sort of actors can engage with them. And I would like to remind ourselves what, PK Das yesterday mentioned in his session, that it is not just important that we know about the strategies and the sort of tactics of bringing those workers together, but is also equally important that we know at large the processes in place. And he gave examples of bottom-up planning, etc., which are also the ways to generate those knowledge, which essentially requires that we are aware of the processes at large which produce such patterns. So in that spirit, we have the session on political economy of urban labor, and we are delighted and honored to have a distinguished panel with us. And as you would see on the agenda, we have with us Professor Praveen Jha, who retired as a Sukhmoy Chakrabarti Chair Professor from Center for Economic Studies and Planning at Jawaharlal Nehru University, and also he's the founding editor of Agrarian South, a journal of political economy. We are really honored that you could be with us, sir, today, and we are very thankful. I would be giving a longer introduction. The session will also feature Mr. Sandeep Chachra, as you know, who's the executive director at ActionAid and also the managing editor of Agrarian South Journal of Political Economy and the former co-chair of World Urban Campaign. I would not be taking more time to introduce Sandeep, as we have already heard his introductions and you have also heard him speak. But I would take this moment to invite both of you to the dais, and I would give an introduction to Professor Jha. Sir, please. So, Professor Jha retired as a professor, and also he was the chairperson for the Center for Economic Studies and Planning at Jawaharlal Nehru University, where he also founded the Center for Informal Sector and Labor Studies, a former visiting fellow at the ILO and a visiting professor at several universities. Globally, his research focuses on the political economy of development, labor, agriculture, public finance, and education. He's a founding member of Agrarian South Network and founding editor of Agrarian South Journal of Political Economy. His recent book is Labor in Contemporary India, which is published by Oxford University Press in 2016. Welcome again, sir. We will be starting this session by a launch of a book, which is titled as Guaranteeing Work, Reclaiming the City, reviewing the status of urban employment guarantee in India. This work was done by ActionAid Association with the support of Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung South Asia. And we are very honored that we do have somebody joining us from Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung South Asia. So I would like to invite Mr. Rajiv Kumar to the dais also to launch the book. A huge round of applause to Mr. Rajiv Kumar. Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, needless to say, has been a partner to ActionAid in advancing the struggles that we have been doing. Sir, we have been really lucky that you have been associated with, particularly with Urban Action School and other researches. I would also like to invite Dr. Matthew Verghese onto the dais, who is our partner for this Urban Action School. And I would like to invite Dr. Esther Maria Silvam to launch the book for this booklet. Esther is the one who is leading our work in the Southern Cluster. Dr. Maria Silvam, please on the dais. And I would request Joseph to hand over the booklets for the launch. Yes, you have to open and a good picture will be clicked, and then the booklet is already available openly on ActionAid website along with the other booklet which was launched. So we encourage you to visit the website. We'll also share the links on the WhatsApp. All the publications that we produce are openly accessible in the spirit of open knowledge. I think, yeah. Thank you. I would really urge all of you. This book, the reason it's being launched here is also Professor Jha is one of the author, and he has helped shape helped us to review the urban employment guarantee programs across India, and it's really a a nuanced analysis of what urban employment guarantee schemes in India can achieve and are failing to do so, and what is more needed to do it. So yes. Yes. So it's a review of the schemes. It's a review of existing urban employment guarantee schemes in India. So with that, I would like to close my remarks and hand it over to Professor Jha. We will be starting with Professor Jha, followed by remarks from Sandeep. And we have around 1.5 hours, so we can take time equally. Yes.
Yeah, that's fine. Fine. Yes. So thank you very much for including me in this conversation. I hope I'm audible to those at the end. Not really. Okay. Little louder. Okay. All right. Okay. Should I go there? I think. Should be. No, that's fine. I think I'll. Yeah. All right. So as I said, very happy to be here, and thanks to the organizers for including me in this conversation. Now, political economy of labor indeed is a very large theme. A political economy of urban labor. There are too many different kinds of axes through which we can get into it, analyze it, and so on. And some of the earliest discussions in modern social sciences on this particular theme was on this whole issue of the trajectories of transformation from rural to urban, right? Which happens with the evolution of capitalism. See, capitalism is the first system when the urban as an economic entity tends to become very significant, if not dominant and hegemonic. Right? Of course, there is a difference between the North and the South, what we today call North and what we call South. But in spite of these differences, the fundamental fact of the significance and the growing significance of the urban, even in the South, is something which must be taken note of. Now, if you look at the literature, possibly Arthur Lewis, writing in 1950s, was one of the first major kind of, let's say, voices in modern development economics, right? Development economics as a discipline came into being essentially, the way it is visualized in the standard literature. It basically comes into being during the interwar years between the World War I and II, right? And the real kind of fruition of it, consolidation of it. Again, I'm talking from a very mainstream perspective, right? By mainstream, I also include the Keynesian revolution and what had happened in the light of what the great John Maynard Keynes, possibly the greatest economist of the 20th century, had to say about capitalism per se and how it can be handled, what are its trajectories, etc. I'll not get into that, but it also provided a major foundation for thinking about development economics. And the basic point that the development economics was trying to make, the mainstream Keynesian development economics, that you can't leave things to the market. Market is a disaster. Market must be used, but if you leave it entirely to the market, It doesn't take you anywhere, right? So before Keynes, there was this very powerful ideology of what is known as laissez-faire, which translated in English means let us free. Let who free? Let markets free. That was the basic ideology, right? So the thinking from the early days of capitalism in an ideological sense was fundamentally this. From, let's say, 16th century onward, from the beginnings of capitalism, when the market starts becoming more and more of a force, right? And by 17th, 18th century, it does become a decisive force, along with many other things. We don't have time to get into those details. For instance, one of the most important and most decisive things in the history of beginnings of capitalism and its evolution is colonialism. That was the most important thing. But let me not get into that right now for reasons of time. Yeah. So now that kind of orthodoxy gets fundamentally, dramatically challenged by John Maynard Keynes. Right? And then we have a second phase in the history of capitalism, which we can call regulated economic order. Right? What does that fundamentally mean? That you can't rely on the market. So the markets have to be guided, they have to be chided, they have to be sort of directed and so on and so forth. And who does that job? Of course, it has to be governments. Governments of different kinds. It could be local government, it could be provincial government, it could be national government, it could be global government, right? Depending on what is the task at hand and so on. So if you look at things like this global compact along Universal Declaration of Human Rights, right? Philadelphia Declaration, right? All these things, all these happen immediately after the Second World War, right? Or towards the end of the Second World War, right? These were basically trying to impress on the policy making canvas that we can't rely solely on the market. Market has to be tamed, disciplined, guided, etc., etc. Right? And that is the beginnings of development economics. And in that, as I said, you had a number of very powerful voices. Please note again, I am insisting on the label mainstream development economics. What do I mean by that? I am essentially trying to tell us that there is a long tradition of thinking about capitalism very differently, and that is called political economy tradition, right? Which starts with Adam Smith. You have David Ricardo, of course, the greatest of them all, Dr. Karl Marx, right? And Marxian political economy gives you a very different understanding of how capitalism functions, how it evolves, what needs to be done, etc., and how does it get shaped as it keeps evolving, and how very different kinds of forces are put on the front burner at the center stage in shaping anything that can be good about capitalism. So it's not simply the state as an actor, right? But it has to be something far more basic, something far more fundamental. And that is contestation between the contending forces, in particular, capital and labor. That is the crux of the Marxian thinking, right? So I'll come to some of that in a moment. Somebody has to keep the time. Ice, you will please do that for me. Okay, very good. But give me at least 5 minutes, of notice before I shut up. Okay. All right. So within the heterodox mainstream Keynesian development economics, you have the great Arthur Lewis, one of the first Nobel laureates, right? And he gave us an utterly simple kind of formulation. He says that there is rural, there is urban, right? Rural is where you have huge amount of unemployed, disguised labor and so on. Urban is where, you cannot simply be unemployed, right? Because if there is no work, you get back to the rural. Because in that context of rurality, somebody will feed you. Urban, nobody will feed you, right? You have to earn your whatever. So rural has huge reserves of, as Arthur Lewis thought, disguised labor, okay, hidden unemployment, okay. And in the urban area, you're there as a worker only when there is work. So you're working and getting something from your work. Now, Lewis's formulation was that the urban keeps expanding, labor from rural keeps flowing out, and at some point, all labor is exhausted because of urbanization. Okay? So that was his, I'm putting it very simply, doing bit of an injustice to Arthur Lewis, but that is the main story which he has to offer, right? Lewis's formulation in 1980s, this was 1950s, is much more nuanced and so on, but let me not get into that. Okay. So this whole process of urbanization and transition of labor from rural to urban was put in a very simple schematic manner, but along with that, also in a hopeful manner. And there will be urbanization. Urbanization will come to the rescue of everyone, right? And labor markets will become very tight, so wages will start improving. So up to a point when that rural, hidden, disguised labor is not exhausted, the wage rate in urban areas are flat because people are still moving from here to there. So there's no reason why in a market system the wages should be rising. But once that labor is exhausted, that disguised labor, you have a kind of an upward wage trend. So up to a point, a flat thing, yeah, for good 30, 40, 50, 70, whatever number of years. But then this starts taking off. And then there is general happiness after that. Okay? So that's the sort of story you get from the great Nobel laureate Arthur Lewis. Lewisian story is not only very simple and it has some powerful insights for sure. Yeah, there is a mobility and everyone knows it. So on that count, Lewis was not saying something very profound. Yes, but it is also fundamentally misleading. Right? Now, it is fundamentally misleading in the sense of what actually is the feature of capitalism in the core kind of sense with respect to several immanent tendencies. Now, this is here where I'll briefly put in the political economy message to you. As I've already said, Dr. Marx was the ultimate giant of political economy. Nobody has surpassed him. Right? Till date, it's highly unlikely that anyone will ever surpass him. Of course, things have been modified, changed, supported, etc. Because Marx was really thinking in terms of almost a most abstract system, or thinking in terms of the laws of motion of capitalism, right? Details he was not getting into. To the extent that he got into some details, it was basically looking at the British industrialization. So, of course, there are serious limitations and so on and so forth. Marx thinks of capitalism as a system which ultimately will take the world in a particular direction with all its problems, X, Y, Z, and so on and so forth. But fundamentally, it is a highly simplified model. Let me not get into the problems of what Marx's analysis could not engage with. That is not germane right here. What I want to share with you is something called the general law of primary accumulation. Now, as it happens, I had taken some notes when I wanted to come here, and happily I left all my notes in my hotel room. Doesn't matter. I'll kind of pick up a quotation from somewhere which will let me just. These are things possibly nobody has ever kind of engaged with you in a very serious fashion. Some of you may be aware of it, right? But this is what I consider the most important message with respect to labor coming from Marxian analysis. As I said, Marx titled it as one particular law. He visualized capitalism as a set of laws, very much like Newton. So it is at that level of abstraction, and that is how he is visualizing system. Please pay great attention to the quotation which I am offering you. The greater the social wealth, the functioning capital, the extent and energy of its growth, and therefore also the absolute mass of the proletariat and the productiveness of its labor, the greater is the industrial reserve army. So productivity is zooming. The overall size of the workforce is expanding, right? System is booming, greater the social wealth and so on. So everything is hunky-dory, much happiness. But what is also happening simultaneously is that the proportion of those who are unemployed, right? In Marxian formulation, there are three phrases used interchangeably: labor reserves, reserve army of labor, and the expression which I prefer more than others, the other two, relative surplus population, right? So, as things are happening in a very positive fashion, otherwise for the economy, greater is the industrial reserve army. Continuation of the quotation: the same causes which develop the expansive power of capital develop also the labor power at its disposal. The relative mass of the industrial reserve army increases, therefore, with the potential energy of wealth. But the greater this reserve army in proportion to the active labor army, the greater is the mass of a consolidated surplus population whose misery is in inverse ratio to its torment of labor. The more extensive, finally, the Lazarus layers of the working class and the industrial reserve army, the greater is the official pauperism. This is the absolute general law of capitalist accumulation, right? Now, this is one of among the most important laws that Marx puts on the table. He has about, 7, 8 very, very important laws of motion. If you want to increase the list, you can go up to 20. But let me not burden you with too much of and too many of these laws. Okay. Right. So, what is the story that you hear now? As regards heterodox mainstream development economics, Keynesian or otherwise, there are variations of that. Let me again not get into it. Let's say the standard development economics, versus political economy. Standard development economics tells you that as development happens, labor absorption becomes a non-issue, right? Lewis put it in the simplest manner. What does Marxian political economy tell you? That as the system is expanding, developing, and so on, what is also happening is that the size of the relative surplus population that keeps expanding. The proportion between what he calls active labor army, that is those employed, and this larger mass of unemployed relative surplus population, that gets weighed down more and more by the latter, relative surplus population, in the favor of the latter, right? Now here, the next point which we need to understand is we are talking about capitalism very clearly, very explicitly in Marxian political economy, which is driven by its own immanent tendencies, its own laws, right? Of course, capitalism can be civilized. Things can be made much better. All of you have heard of the welfare state, which happened when? After the Second World War. Occasional kind of moves in that direction is very old. You can start with 1600, the so-called poor laws. When there were too many people who had been expelled from rural areas and had become vagabonds, nothing to eat, and if you don't have anything to eat and you're a vagabond, what will you do? Rob, steal, if needed, murder, so that you can survive. Now, this poor law was exactly a response to this very dangerous situation. When from UK, people were being basically expelled without anything in their hand, without any prospects for them. What happens? Right? They become looters and murderers. So what do? You put them behind bars, make them do some work and give them something to eat. That was the poor law in 1600, right? The first law ever to try and think a little more about workers was courtesy the first so-called Iron Man from Germany, Chancellor Bismarck, 1870s. See, if some of you may have read the Communist Manifesto, which says a specter is haunting Europe, specter of a socialist revolution. This is 1844, 1848, 1846. Repeatedly, Marx is making these points. In fact, it starts in a letter that he wrote to his Marx when he was not even 20, right? In 1837. Okay? He says that, look, this has to be taken very seriously. Germany will be destroyed if this is okay. Now, you move from there to capital and so on. And Marx basically tells us that, yes, indeed, look at how UK or Great Britain or England is, those days he was basically referring to England, how it is trying to sort of contain the unrest of workers by giving them some dose, right? Otherwise, there would be a dramatic kind of upsurge and so on. Chancellor Bismarck, he says workers must be given some social security. That is 1877-78, right? All this is based on, and he was somebody who hated socialism, but he's giving some doles to workers precisely because he knew how to ensure the survival of capitalism. So it starts from there. 1930s, you have the Swedish government, which actually gets into a reasonably serious social security program, but it was only one amongst the many governments in continental Europe, right? Kind of an exception. It is only after the Second World War that you have what is known as a kind of a welfare state in the global north, right? Now, as it happens, it was not because capitalists suddenly changed their hearts. It was precisely because of the contestations throughout, let's say, late 19th century and coming into 20th century. In particular, the most powerful factor there was the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, which had shown that if you don't behave, this is what will happen, right? There will be socialism of some kind. You may like, dislike, whatever you want to do with that Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, and so on. But this is something which shaped the trajectory of the next to 8 decades or so in very profound ways. That is very, very important to know. In fact, welfare state couldn't have come into being without Bolshevik Revolution, right? No, there were many other things, but that was the key. Okay, so as Max had said, that like all other laws, the working of any law, the law that I had mentioned earlier, is modified in its actual working by many circumstances, but we don't have time to get into that. Okay, relative surplus labor. You will have to give me 2 minutes extra from Sandeep's time. Okay. Relative surplus population. Okay. Now, Marx actually thinks of, and this is a much better formulation than this urban unemployment and this, that, and so on. He thinks of this consisting of 3 components: floating, latent, and stagnant. Floating is that component of relative surplus population which is waiting in the wings to get, if there is a possibility, some employment. Right? So, to quote Marx, in the centers of modern industry, factories, manufacturers, ironworks, mines, etc., the laborers are sometimes repelled, sometimes attracted in great masses. The number of those employed increases on the whole, although in a constantly decreasing proportion to the scale of production. Here, the surplus population exists in the floating form. Right? So, for them, the opportunity is something which is a low-hanging fruit, as and when it arises. Okay. The second category, that second segment, which is when you have a long-term structural kind of transformation, so the entire components and segments of the economy, which were earlier non-capitalist, become capitalist. So think of India's transition, agriculture, tribal economies, how increasingly that becomes more and more. So then they become sort of proletariat proper, or waiting to become proletariat proper, and so on. And finally, the third segment, namely the stagnant. It consists of those who constitute almost I'm quoting Marx, an inexhaustible reservoir of disposable labor power, but suffer from extremely irregular unemployment, are almost unemployable. In fact, this segment almost merges with those who dwell in the sphere of pauperism. So the last of these 3 forms that I mentioned, quoting Marx, is obviously at the bottom of the economic social hierarchy, which includes, again to quote Marx, vagabonds, criminals, prostitutes, malnourished, elderly, etc. Right? Constituting more or less the unemployable. Right? It's a class of, again to quote Marx, dangerous paupers. So let me just give you 2-3 sentences. It is the demoralized and the ragged and those unable to work, chiefly people who succumb to their incapacity for adaptation due to the division of labor, people who have passed the normal age of the laborers, the victims of industry, whose numbers keep increasing with the increase of dangerous machinery of mines, chemical works, etc., the mutilated, the sickly, and the widows, and so on. Right? So, we can't think of, employed, unemployed in some simple fashion. That is the most powerful message. You have to connect it with the logic of the system. In that, two things are important. One, do we leave it to the immanent tendencies? Do we leave it to whatever is the quest of capital and it can go away scot free to do whatever it wants? Or is it the case that capital can be contained? Now, that, please note, does not depend on state in any sense. It depends on what comes prior to the state, what comes in contestation of capital and labor vis-a-vis the state, right? That came to a very significant fruition only after Bolshevik Revolution and so on, right? So coming specifically to the urban areas now, you can sort of basically see that increasingly you have had with neoliberalism fantastic acceleration, accentuation in the processes of what, again, turning to the great master, what he called primitive accumulation. I modify that, I call it primitive expropriation, right? That is something which is the essence of what we today know as neoliberalism. Neoliberalism starts raising its head from late 1960s. From 1970s, its fangs are hissing all over the place. It starts destroying whatever social security you had. One example, USA is the largest, most powerful economy in the world. Do you know what has happened? No, it is. All of you know that, right? Between 1968 and 2013, average wages of American workers stagnated. This is the most powerful economy of the world that we are talking about. Why has such a situation come about? Precisely because of the onslaught of capital in the context of neoliberalism. So what needs to be done is to change the system. Not just giving some goodies here, some goodies there, and so on and so forth. Of course, if you're a organization working here and there, that would be your primary thing, that how can you sort of take care of people's hunger and so on and so forth, distribute some food. That doesn't take you very far. That will never take you very far. Right? What needs to be done is to work in conjunction with all those who are challenging this model of capitalism. Capitalism can give you some goodies for sure. State capitalism that we talked about, welfare state that we talked about, even in India and the global south and so on, you had a situation when a number of provisions were brought into being, right? So all that is feasible within limits for sure, right? So ultimate goal has to be transcending capitalism. Now, when will that happen? How will that happen? What will be the shape and size of socialism? None of us knows, right? That is in the realm of the unknown. Yet, that is something which we have to give content to give shape to, and so on, to work towards that, etc. Right? So, the political economy of urban informality. So, the first thing which I wanted to caution you is that drop this expression called formal informal. It is, in an analytical sense, useless. Right? You can think of, let's say, 3 features of formal, 23 features of formal, 43 features of formal. Why should we stop at 3? Why not 23? Why not 43? Right? Now, I'm not saying that any of those features is unimportant. getting a contract, getting social security, important, right? Incidentally, in India's formal sector, 60 to 70% of workers don't have any of these. Formal sector, right? So in any case, I have analytically a quarrel with this formal, informal kind of binary. I don't find it intellectually interesting, useful, and so on. That is why I gave you a different thing. Active regular labor army and relative surplus population. You see, I'm an unrepentant Marxist, incidentally, just in case you have not figured it out by now. Let me put it explicitly. Yeah, that is what informs my academic work. It has informed it for last 40 odd years. And yes, so if you have any questions, etc., we can take that later. Okay, all right.
Thank you, Professor Jha, for that elaborate discussion on the history of both, I mean, political economy, but also to walk us through, the ways in which the terms that you coined have come to about, and particularly is what needs to be done. I mean, it's not just giving the tolls or the small changes, but forcing the system to change, and more importantly, to also push us to go beyond those binaries. I mean, and I think that's a way forward that one should be thought at how they should be brought into praxis, something that we have been discussing. So thanks a lot for that. It definitely took me to my JNU classrooms. I think we'll now be uh, we'll be inviting Mr. Chacha to give his remarks, and then after that we'll move into Q&A. You, we have till 11:15, so if you give about 20-25 minutes time.
Let me know if it's audible or not.
Yes.
My notes. Right. So, very good morning to all of you. I'll get it. Yeah. I prefer looking this way. And those of us who are just waking up, a special good morning to you. There are a few who are late night workers and late morning risers, and there are a few among us. It's a privilege once again to be here with you, and a special privilege for me to be honored and speaking in the presence of Professor Jha, Praveen Jha. You just heard him, an unrepentant Marxist is what he called himself. I am also not repentant. Professor Jha, one of our foremost thinkers on labor in the country and also globally, especially in the global south, if I may say, and in the north, also happens to be my teacher and friend. So it's a special privilege for me to be here with him on the same space. And you could have taken many more minutes from my talk. It would have been good for you, in all humility. And I'm also very pleased that joining us for the day today, and I guess for some more days, is Sheikh Salahuddin ji, who's just joined us. He is one of the leaders of an active, unrepentant, and powerful struggle of gig economy workers. But he will speak to it, not me. So he's here. Also joining us, and welcome, ma'am, is Professor Dr. Mahalaya Chatterjee. Thank you for being here. It's a privilege for us that you are here, and we are very honored and wanting to listen to you and she'll be speaking later this evening, friends, on Global South and the economics and the possibilities of Global South. So this is special, very special. And also it's a privilege that my colleagues are here Sometimes I will not take names. You will know them very well by now. And it's a privilege to offer a few reflections, which is what I will do today. And I thank them for dealing with all my idiosyncrasies. The title informalization is not one coming from me, Professor Jha. That's a popular understanding. So what I'm going to do today is to offer somewhat rarefied, or let me put it simplified, rarefied, correct word, reflections in an attempt to try and relate with you on ground. And the basis of my reflections is going to be the 14 years of direct work of my organization, ActionAid Association, in its quest not to deliver charity or to deliver some rations or to get some small benefits for the workers of our land, but to be part, as Professor Jha said, of that struggle between labor and capital. So that's where our experience, and I'll reflect on some of the experiences later on, for the last 14 active years, paying the price for it as well, comes from. It also comes from numerous earlier urban action schools. This is the 11th version of it. And the last one was specifically on the focus on the question of working people and the city. It also comes from the wisdom that you have shared and your predecessors in such schools have shared, and the networks that continue. It also comes from the struggle, such as the one I referred to just now, working in solidarity. My first, therefore, reflection is what Professor Jha centered his talk on. So, words like informalization, formal workers. Professor Himanshu also touched on some of these aspects the other day. It's a kind of a recap as well. That words like informal, formal are interesting binaries in that sense, but they offer little by the way, or I would even go to say that they divert, they have the function of diverting, Prof, the struggles, in a different direction from the very basic struggle that was outlined here. Be as it may, I want to say that as of today, if you look at it from the working people's perspective, and my lessons and our lessons of founding the Working People's Charter back in 2014, quite active, many of you know it, have related with it in the past, is that from a worker's perspective, this is life. He talked about the relative surplus populace, the reserve army of labor interchangeably, the last term preferred by him. But that's the reality. That is the only viable option as of today. I am not only talking about desirability, Professor Matthew. It's the only viable option for the millions of our workers, for the billions of our workers across the global south. But if we were to take in India, how many crores? Almost all of the people who have registered, or in fact, all of the people who've registered on e-Shram portals, 32 crores or so by now, undercounted, not all have registered in any case, and many, many more. 90% of our working population, you know that, are in the category called informal work, relative surplus populations, contributing roughly about 60%, some would say 45, 60% of the national GDP and growing. So this is not going to end. So this is our experience coming from the ground. And therefore, I would say, go on to say that the current labor regime, and it's not just a very new phenomenon. One can argue, as Professor Himanshu was, and we saw that informality, or the surplus population and the way capital worked was always a reality. But in the way it has multiplied and expanded massively is what he spoke to. I will not get into the theory for now. What he spoke to, the general law of capitalist accumulation. As these things grow, as the welfare grows, as the happiness grows, as the accumulation grows, you will have a larger industrial reserve army or beyond the industrial reserve army. And the other fact, you will also have enhanced populisms. Your last part of the statement. So more and more populist responses. वो तो आपको दिखता है ना. You can see that every single day. राशन दे दो, 5,000 दे दो, 2,000 दे दो महीने का. So that's really the other point. Now, the specific character of what we have seen of informality is determined by the local context, and that will vary. आप शहरों की भी बात ले लें, so you will see that. And not only the character of informality, its gender relations, the caste, ethnicity relations embodied, the occupational structure itself, the kind of returns are linked to the global capital, and the incorporation of that specific context into what he prefers to call global value systems. For the sake of relations, I will say global value chains. It's so very apparent and evident, but I just wanted to make this point from the ground. And I'll make it through some examples. If you look at, and this comes from years of ActionAid's work, tea sector. If you look at tea sector, our work from the tea gardens of North Bengal and from Assam, or the coffee plantations in Karnataka, the area around Ooty and so on and so forth, or our work, ongoing work with sugarcane cutters of the Deccan Plateau, Maharashtra, and a bit around Karnataka, you know that area, and how they are incorporated into the sugar value chains, the global and the national, the value chains itself, the value systems itself. Our work experiences come, in order to make this point, I should also say it comes from the experience of quarry workers, the sandstone quarry workers in Rajasthan, the western part, the marble quarry workers, and their incorporation into export of construction material in different countries, starting from Bangladesh, going on to Dubai, going on to Germany. So whether it is marble exports or whether it is sandstone exports, those beautiful buildings which consume lives of, for every one building, our calculation would be about 4 lives of sandstone quarry workers, or the fact of silicosis, the early death of silicosis. So on and on with all its associated conditions. The work of fishers, inland fishers and coastal fishers, and how that incorporation into the global value system, the trade deal more recently, and the impact of even just the talk of the trade deal and the coming of the trade deal, what it did to fish workers in this state, what it did to shifting of domestic consumption patterns, what it did to the coastal fish workers across the eastern coast of India, is something that you can see changes the structure. It ousts more people. In fact, COVID, and Sheikh is sitting here, at the time of COVID, he will tell the story better, but at the time of COVID, how many millions would have moved to gig economy? So any shock, any global shift, any war, or the ongoing one included, and the gas shortage included, any trade deal, any disruption such as the one we saw in late 90s, 1990s in the financial crisis and its impact on Indonesian workers, will oust and will invite, both oust and invite simultaneously, what Professor Jha has talked of. People into conditions of much escalated precarity, quote unquote informality, and conditions of difficult existence. The state's response we've heard, I just want to a little bit recap. Some will call it ambivalent. Far from it. It's disguised. So at the one level, you have attempts to formalize. You can see this through labor codes, the new labor codes. You can see this through GST applications. You can see this through, as one of you was saying, the digitalization or digitization of the economy. You could see this through demonetization. So at one level, it looks like the state wants to formalize. Let's not get into the binary. But at another level, what is the response? At another level, you're driving people, or people are being driven. It's not as if only the state does this. People are being driven to what has been defined, let me use the word informality for now, with all its associated conditions, lack of social protections, any kind, precarious work of any kind. What some in the agrarian South argue, where I work together with Professor Jha, out of work people. So you look at it. And cities, obviously, he offered his views. My reflection is cities obviously will be concentrations of people looking for work. Our populations have shifted. Urbanization, possibly future liberation, but be as it may, people are concentrated there. And that's, you can see. And that you can also see from the response of workers. When we work on the ground, there is no one pure worker. Your historical analysis would tell you peasant, we are working on peasantry, we are working on organized workers, we are working on workers. There's no one pure worker. So you have the phenomenon, what I mentioned on the first day, the phenomenon of pluri-work. भाई जहां मिल गया वहां नौकरी कर ली या मजदूरी कर ली, खेती में कुछ महीने मजदूरी कर ली, कुछ महीने मजदूरी कर ली, अगर कहीं ईंट भट्टा है, if there's some construction work going on somewhere, some days छोटे शहर में, in a small city, I go there, find some construction work. Some days I may be a gig worker. Look at the Uber drivers. And many more will become Uber drivers. Many more will become gig workers on this ongoing shock. I don't know if there are studies. Professor Jha and activists here, welcome. आप श्रीनगर से पहुंचे हैं जावेद साहब, तो आप अगर देखेंगे तो शायद कोई ऐसे शोध है ही नहीं. There is no such research which is telling us one global shock like the current one, how many people will be driven to a different form of life, to a different precarity, to a different city, back to the rural areas which offer the refuge, as data will tell you, which offer the ultimate refuge from a lonely death, which offer an ultimate refuge to escape the lonely death, to escape the lonely hunger from the city. That is what happened after COVID. The question that I want to come to, therefore, is, so what can be done? And I'll offer a few reflections. What needs done? And what is being done by those who contest capital, not by those who offer charity only or merely. Sometimes charity may be essential, but it doesn't stop there. And that is where I will reflect from our experience of the past and from the ongoing work. Our task, and this I am passing the message to you, You have shown your interest to join urban action schools. You, I'm sure, are here with a purpose. You, I'm sure and confident, are here not to be bystanders of history. I said it the other day. I want to reinforce that. You, I'm sure, are here not to be interpreters of maladies. Not to be, that is also an important task, by the way. An important task of popular education is to be the interpreter of maladies or agonies of the people or difficulties of the people. But you are also here to be active protagonists of how history is being made, how futures are being made. I use these words interchangeably. For today's future is tomorrow's history. And in that context, our primary task, to our mind and from our experience, is to build politicized and active formations of the working people. Our primary task is therefore to build the agency of the relative surplus population of this land with all its contradictions. It's not a simple task. The levels of fragmentation, I'll speak to some of it. So our primary task is to build unions. Our primary task is to build federations or associations of informal workers, collectives of informal workers. Our task, irrespective of what it may cost us, that's a task. And that is precisely what I am honored to represent ActionAid here. That is precisely what we are doing for the last 14, 15 years. Just on this Monday, my colleague Ice tells me, just on this Monday, 3 days ago, after about 2 years of efforts, 3 years, sorry, ma'am, 3 years of efforts, one union of different informal workers, construction workers, quarry workers, sanitation workers, scavengers, hamals, called the Ekjut Mazdoor Union was registered after 3 years of running around membership expansions. And this is not the only example. This is not the only example. I say it here because I got the good news just 3 days ago. We've got many bad news in the same days, but we got the good news 3 days ago. Similarly, such a union, whose name at the moment I forget, was registered 3 months ago after long efforts of 5 years or 4 years in Kushinagar town in eastern Uttar Pradesh. Cross-sectional union of different workers in an attempt to build solidarities or not further fragmentations. It has its own problems. Yeah. I think as I speak in Tamil Nadu, which district is this? Ma'am Esther? Tirunavelli. It's going to be registered soon. Yeah. Those ones which we were registering in 2017, I give the example of Bengal now, the Paschim Banga Graha Pracharika Samiti, it's a union. It's a union of domestic workers. It has its own problems. It's massive. Our idea was to expand it across Bengal. It hasn't. Our idea was to at least build more memberships in Kolkata itself. It hasn't happened. Rather, the state got back to us and pushed us by cancelling the registration 3 months ago of a domestic workers union. Remember what the Supreme Court has really recently observed on it. Not on that, but in general on domestic workers. Why do we need to unionize domestic workers? That's what they said. They will create troubles. This is an observation. This is not a judgment. But today's observation is tomorrow's judgment. Remember that. This goes on. So that's a task. I am not taking many names. In Punjab, we've been struggling in the districts of Mansa, in the districts of Taran Taran, to register the first Rural Domestic Workers Union. We call it rural because this whole confusion of what's urban, what's rural, and the rural-urban continuum which was spoken of, or spoken to. We haven't managed to succeed till now. One day we shall. That's the path that we need to go on. Why? It's self-evident. If there isn't that politicization, if there isn't that solidarity building, contestation against capital, the labor capital question which was raised here, cannot happen in some vacuum. It cannot happen in some theoretical sort of a premise. It has to manifest in daily struggles. And what do these formations and unions do, by the way? What do we do on the ground? We fight against wage theft to try and return the wages stolen. In an ongoing campaign, we are bringing together where lakhs of women come. We have records of X number of lakhs of women who come to find solace in the law of Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act, in that Kanun called the Posh Kanun. Why they find solace? What can we do if the contractor is harassing me? What can I do if, as a domestic a domestic worker, an employer is harassing me? What can I do if I'm vending vegetables and the customers or the police start misbehaving? And they do. So you see lakhs of women coming into a very simple popular education method that we have, which is essentially doing labor schools. Mazdoor Pathshala. This is going on across about 300 districts of the country, and it doesn't happen at the district level really. I'm just giving a geographical sense. It happens locally, panchayats or above panchayat district sort of sub block levels and so on and so forth, block levels and so on and so forth. Consciousness of, and this was a point discussed, is fragmented. Progressive, the social consciousness what is your condition, position, what you fight is highly fragmented at this moment. And the active forces working to fragment it along caste lines, along lines of religion. Yesterday we were discussing about symbolisms of animals in cities. I was raising that question of dog, cow, and pigeon. And how do you sort of look at the use of those animals to possibly fragment or build class divides? Professor Matthew, I was expecting that answer which you did. Class divides or worker divides or worker fragmentations using those animal symbolisms. The symbolisms are always important. Very, very important. And in civilizational sort of spaces, in countries which claim and are, and there could be several modern day nation states, which claim to be civilizational in nature and continued civilizations, those symbolisms are huge and they're piled up. So you can pick any and use any for your ends, both positive or negative, progressive or regressive. So the use of symbolisms is one facet of this fragmentation. There are many others. In the relative surplus population, this phenomenon of out of work people, those who are almost totally out of work, those who are hardly in any work, the refugees are totally out of work. Yeah. The other ones, maybe 20% in work. So who's fighting against them? The ones who are more in work. And why so? It's an existential battle. It's a battle, and that's really how chauvinism uses it, right? So there are fragmentations. So how to build solidarities in the face of those fragmentations? I have like 2 minutes, or 3 minutes. Sorry, I'm not reclaiming all the time. How to build solidarities remains a big matter. But friends, let's also be real. In order to spur solidarity building, to spur unions, to spur relationships, social relationships, organizations, formations, activists have also to pay attention to more existential real life issues. Those were referred to, I'm recapping, claiming entitlements, claiming redistribution, registering in e-shram even though it doesn't give nothing for the moment, claiming that social redistribution if it happens in future, fighting for that, claiming the little pension, claiming the little widow pension, claiming a disability allowance. Those are battles with the state. And one panelist was remarking, let's recap, that sometimes these become battles against state and we let off the hook the capital. So we fight the state, which is anyway colluding, but we are not fighting that Ambani. So that's the other bit that I want to say. Issue was raised about delinking from capital. Prof, the other day, maybe you should reflect on it. One of our participants wanted to suggest the pathway of delinking from capital. Now, in the context of Vietnam, I could say that they were attempting it, and then their own left party, irrespective of its level of organization now, which is pretty okay, made this phrase that we are on the, which is an ever relevant phrase, which he ended with, or we are on the path to socialism. But at this moment, we are an island living in the sea of capitalism, surrounded by the sharks of capitalism. So how do we do it in a manner which is organic and people built? And what will it take? These are some of the issues coming out. I reflected on some of them. I think the struggle is at that level as well. At the Agrarian South and at ActionAid, we romance, and not idle romance, not a lazy romance, with the issue of Bandung, with the solidarity of Bandung, with the solidarity of the tricontinental in Havana some years later. And why do we do so? It's with the idea of building an autonomy, a solidarity amongst the peoples of the global South. I underline the word peoples of the global South, for the problem is, at some stage also with the, and I don't want to make that polarity between people and nations, with the nations of the global South, full of contradictions. Look at the response to the capture and the hijacking, totally against international law, of the president of Venezuela, or what's happening to Cuba, or the sanctions that are going on for the last 60 years in Cuba, or what are the new sanctions? I'm not glorifying any. Or look at what happened on Iran. The very nationalistic, transactional foreign policy response of almost several countries of the global South, ours included. Apna apna dekh lete hain. So there are contradictions of the kind. How do we overcome those contradictions? We cannot delink. We have to fight it. We cannot delink from the capital in a lazy, easy manner with all of these contradictions. Friends, I would like to close. I've seen another notice. And I want to say in the end, to close, it's a hard task. So there are social progress, societal change, you all know, is a hard task. I know it as ActionAid. We paid huge prices for it. The state has been after us for the last 12 years, to be precise, or more, 14 years actually, to be precise, as of this year. Our registrations have been cancelled. Our people are scouted around for it's a direct task of organizing. We have been called various epithets. One of them is anti-national, but there are many others. There are many other interesting ones which You don't wear as only as a badge of honor. You don't. Because it's not about heroism or sheroism. It's not. It's about continuing on that path. It's about existing. And I'm not talking of Action Aid here. There are several others. We were talking the other day of ESG, right? Environmental Support Group, for a wonderful presentation made by you, Bhargaviji, yesterday. Yeah. And your fight. So it's a hard task. And to exist is to resist. Please remember the people of Palestine, people of Gaza in particular. Their slogan is what I end with. Existence is resistance. And furthermore, existence for a cause and resistance for a cause is necessary if you have started and embarked on the path of what Praveen Jha ended with, the path of being at that point where if you have dreams of looking at what is called the path to socialism or the road to socialism, a path of egalitarianism, a path of justice, another better world, then essentially the task is of confronting capital. There is no shortcuts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandeep, for not only sort of connecting what the issues that Professor Jhai spoke about, but also sharing from ActionAid's vast experience of working on the ground and not speaking on behalf of people, but speaking with people and outlining the struggles that have been going on for almost a decade now. But how do we extend that further, and also the prices we pay for them? Uh, I think I would like to open the floor for discussion. I would like not to take much time by offering my reflections. So we have about 15 minutes to have question Q&A, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm Matthew. I'm the Center for Urban Studies. Can you hear? So it's been extremely interesting listening to you, Professor Cha, and the extrapolation that you made. I am particularly intrigued by the way in which, especially focusing on Marx itself, the dwelling on surplus. I think what we really lack, and I would like a reflection on it, is thinking from excess. This was a subtitle of a book that we tried to deal with. The excess presents itself as a spectacle in a way, or is it so? Because spectacle, or the same root word is specter. So it could be terrifying as well as it could be like well on the display. And it becomes very evident probably in the next session on the way in which the excess becomes a spectacle through the gig economy and many aspects like that. So I would like your reflection on how excess could be drawn, the idea of excess could be drawn from Marxian perspectives to reflect on the contemporary state of economy. That will be extremely interesting. Thank you.
Do we have other questions? There is one. Would you like to give excess? EXCESS.
Hi, sir. Myself, Atulya. Can I? Sylvia Federici also criticized Marx, actually. So, in a feminist viewpoint, rereading capitalism. So, she argued like capitalism also exploits the unpaid reproductive labor. So, how can we rethink the urban economies, continue to invisible invisible women unpaid labors, while celebrating the growth and productivity?
Thank you. I think the question of gender and capital. There's one more. We take three.
Hello everyone, good morning. So my question around the domestic workers. So when sir you are mentioning about the domestic workers, who ensures justice when it's coming to the discrimination happen in the private households? So there is a lot of organization working for the domestic workers. Then who holds the power? Like the problem is really the marginalized community, but there's always the rally protest done by the organization, something else. When the power shift happen to the community people, that is my first question. Then second one is that when sir talked about the poor, like uh, the poor, it's a social justice or it's about controlling the poverty. The government really solving the poverty or just managing it? Yeah, this is my two questions.
I think we can.
Hi, sir. My name is Sindhu. So I wanted to ask, how can we look at the role of, or how can we look at the meaningful participation of children through these perspectives that you have shared with us today? Because so far it's the fourth day. This is a shortcoming on my part also that I did not mention children. And children are not the future, they are the present. They are very much the citizens today. And when we think of participatory governance, when we think of just futures, we need to think of what we are doing with children today and how we are fostering their participation. So what would be your views on this, sir? Thank you.
It's not a question. Actually, it's one of my experience I'm sharing. Maybe I can't give much details because this is regarding the working of various welfare boards, like say for example, construction workers welfare board, and each state has set up a lot of welfare boards. So I am specifically focusing on one of the construction workers welfare board because just before my retirement, because most of the urban workers, large number consists of construction workers, and most of the big projects of the government, there is a clause that 1% of the total cost of the construction has to be deducted by the executing agency, and it has to be transferred to the welfare board within 30 days. So in normally what happens is that they deduct the money from the bill, but they don't transfer it to the welfare board, which is supposed to do a lot of welfare activities for these workers. And when we point out, immediately they transfer, crores of rupees at a go, and then the functioning of the workers welfare board is also not that, to the extent it is expected to do. So there are some reports available on the CAG. So maybe Action Aid can, further. And one more thing is, they get the minimum wages. Okay, now they made it mandatory that the amount has to be transferred online. They have a bank account. Everything is there perfect. But then the contractors take the what do you call ATM card. So how do you ensure this correct payment?
Thank you.
I think it's better. Yeah. Thank you. All right. We'll have some division of labor. I don't want to hog all the time. This whole question of excesses or, excess. I mean, I think it's been quite evident for quite some time that, Earth is groaning under the weight of overproduction. And that overproduction is organically connected with ceaseless quest for accumulation. A complete disaster. There have been several kind of estimates by economists, political economists, scientists, etc., that what we already have can probably feed 60 times the current population with better distribution. Because what happens in terms of absolutely terrible distribution which we have as on this planet, we have huge amounts of wastages, etc., connected with that. So you know it very well, so I will not elaborate on it. But this is something which is a mark of basically what thinkers like Oscar Lange, Prabhat Patnaik, and others, building on Marx's model of analysis in capital called spontaneous capitalism. A capitalism which is uncontrolled, sort of is driven by its own immanent tendencies, its own kind of devices, and so on and so forth. So I think it is always feasible to build a better capitalism. But how far? To what extent will it last? You see, in fact, Karl Polanyi, for instance, he kind of thought of that transition towards limited, geographically speaking, welfare state, because in the global south, we didn't really have anything of a welfare state. I mean, we had some, kind of whatever, giveaways in the name of doing some things, but basic things, good quality primary health, education, etc., were never a reality in most parts of the global south, as we know. So he actually called it the Great Transformation. That great book by Polanyi, where he argued that, look, economy had been completely disembedded from the society in the long march of laissez-faire, and we have now come to a point where it will get re-embedded on that double movement of capital that he talked about, and how that will then create a paradise, right? So we have had all kinds of false starts, etc. So the real thing is, how do we sort of, I mean, ultimately the question is, how do we transcend, capitalism, capital, etc. I mean, I don't think of it as something which is very easy, but it can be contained in dramatic ways, and at least for a while, create possibility of transcending it. Right? This is where, one of the last conversations that I had with the late Professor Samir Amin, both Sandeep and I were reasonably well known to him, and I had asked him, what do you think of China? This is one of my very last conversations with him, 2019. Would you want to call it capitalist? Would you want to call it socialist or what? He said, it's neither capitalist nor socialist. It is a model of state capitalism. Right? And with that, what it has achieved, we should not scoff at. Right? This is a very, very important achievement which we need to celebrate in an era where socialism has become a terrible word, right? I mean, the way things unraveled from 1990s onward, etc. Now, look at India and China, look at the comparison up to 1980s in terms of even per capita income. China was reasonably behind us up to 1980s. Now, its per capita income is 5 times more than us, but forget that. Look at education, look at health, right? And there are all kinds of other issues which you can flag, and there is no freedom, no democracy, and so on. But on that, again, we don't have time to get into a fuller conversation. But I completely agree with you that this is something which connects with the innermost sort of quest of capitalism, what you were talking about, and how do we sort of, at least, we have only one planet. I mean, it's gone. It's effectively gone. I mean, I am completely convinced that the students who are sitting here are facing a grim future in terms of the climate crisis, what happens to the planet, and so on and so forth. No, I mean, it's we are in a trajectory which is very difficult to sort of reclaim and so on in any purposeful, meaningful manner. And for that, I think it's extremely important to hit where it matters. Neoliberalism as a macroeconomic policy regime must be opposed tooth and nail. If it means paying for it with our lives, so be it. That, to me, is the biggest problem. Not really looking at the symptoms of it, but the real kind of structure which is there. Palantir, this IT company, it is just one IT company which has 5 billionaires as executive officers. Look at what has happened to the levels of inequality. Okay, I'll not get started on that, otherwise it will take too much time. Okay, Sylvia Federici, of course, I mean, she was absolutely right. I mean, you see, Marx basically gives us a kind of sketch, right? But you couldn't have expected Marx to get into a detailed kind of analysis, etc., of a host of issues which he had flagged, including the gender question. And in fact, the great book by Engels in 1894, right, is building on Marx's insights in very, very important, and he keeps kind of returning to Marx, right? So, in parenthesis and etc., etc. In any case, we should not be issues like social reproduction, etc. And the work that has been done by feminist Marxist scholars in the last maybe 100 years is absolutely astounding. And likewise, if you're working in India and if you are not including caste in your Marxist political economy, you're finished. It doesn't make sense, right? Susan George, we lost her a few weeks ago. She has this fantastic book, How the Other Half Dies. She asks a very powerful rhetorical question there. Can you think of the poorest person than the poorest man? Her rhetorical answer is yes, indeed, his wife. So it is absolutely important to integrate these as basic units of analysis: caste, gender, what have you, questions of climate, not in any marginal manner, not as add-ons, but in a central manner. And we need to do all that. And I think many of us are trying to engage with those. Last bit, children, they are the most vulnerable citizens, right? And basically, up to a certain age, let's say 5, 6, 7, 10, whatever, right? I mean, it sort of is the general practice to think that they do not have any agency, right? Now, I would say that maybe up to 2, 3, they probably do not have an agency, right? But certainly beyond that, they start developing their agency, and we need to listen to them. If they're sort of getting frightened from the school that they've started going to, there must be something deeply wrong. How do we address that? I'll just tell you a story. Some 3 decades ago, some professor from Germany took me to Denmark, and he was a close friend, and he had relatives in Denmark. So he said, "Chalo chalo घूमने चलते हैं." हमने कहा बहुत बढ़िया. So we end up in a village where he had his relatives, and that village was having the village council meeting that day. What was the issue? The issue was that here was a young man from Pakistan who had married a Danish girl, right? And both of them were studying in the US. They had come back to Denmark, and then they had a daughter who was now roughly 2-year-old. And in Denmark, those days, there was this thing that once the child is close to 2-year-old, you have to ensure some kind of interaction in the mother tongue in a formal manner, institutional manner, and so on and so forth. What you call play school or whatever else, so on. Now, mother was, it was the opposite, that the male was from Denmark and the mother was from Pakistan, yeah. So she, of course, was basically, in terms of mother tongue, Urdu. So this village was debating, what do we do now? Because in the 300 radius of that area, 300 km, There was not a single person who could sort of give any instruction. They ended up, the village council decided for 4 hours, and ended up importing a person who was put in the school, village school, for 2 years to ensure that the child has, a kind of what the decision was taken by the elders, but it was thinking about the child in the deepest possible manner. I mean, India, what are we doing with our children? Wherever you go, you have literally thousands of them. I'm just Delhi, I live in Delhi, and you just get out of JNU and you start kind of crying. "Oh, what's happening?" All those traffic crossings and so on and so forth, right? So there is a world apart. Yeah. China is much better than India in this respect. Yes, indeed. So you have raised a very profound question, right? I think we are not even thinking about this at the level of policy conversations. We have had lots of good reports, etc. But then, the progress has been very little. If anything, I do not actually see any progress. Shanta Sinha is somebody who I have worked very closely with. She has been associated with us with many things, and she keeps bemoaning that probably in spite of struggling all through her life with the issues of children, the achievement has been so little. Yeah. She's on the board of ActionAid also, and that's the other place where I interact with her. So yes, indeed, it's a very, very difficult and challenging issue. But let me, again, in terms of prioritizing, let's think of the larger macroeconomic regime as the beginning of the conversation and then start connecting the dots. What is happening to budgets for education? Right? What is happening to budgets for children? If you look at many of these things, which are very important, Sandeep. Thank you.
I'll try and avoid some of the repetitions, but I'll make a few reflections. I'm aware that, how much time? No time. I'm not desperate to reflect, but nevertheless, to honor the issues, I think he has already said just one line. Is it better? It sounds better to me. So if you want humanity's liberation, women's liberation is the driver of humanity's liberation. So that's something I'll say. The rest has been reflected. And the other point I'd like to make is one of the pathways which I didn't mention is to build feminist solidarity economies, collectives of women. Now, good place to study this is here, to look at the Kutumshri example of, it's not just about economic liberation. It's about agency, it's about solidarity building, it's about the power of women per se. So I just stop here, just added reflections to what he has already mentioned. Many more examples. ActionAid has done a number of them, including the big one, which is a women's farmer producer organization, the first in the country in Bundelkhand. This is not an advertisement, this is serious work. Yeah. So second point on children, totally concur with what Prof has already said. I just want to say that some years ago, we built, 10 years ago, we built the idea of, there has to be a narrative, right? Against the smart cities which were being driven then. You talked about city. So we built the idea of participatory people's vision of the city. It's not easy, but one of the big questions is, and I think the other day, Professor M. Satish Kumar I am recapping just for your memory's sake as well. Also mentioned on the agency and the question of children vis-a-vis the cities, and it's not limited to only peripheral spaces. The problem is, as I talked about pluri-work, study it from the perspective of children. What's really happening to children of informal workers in our cities, or the majorities of workers in our cities? So that's something you must investigate, and that's why I made the statement the first day. Children of a domestic worker would invariably end up being an informal or mostly a domestic worker. And that tells the sorry tale of affairs. And that therefore means it's children's agency, yes, for sure. But that therefore means there have to be structural changes in the way we analyze, in the way we interpret, and in the way we act on things. My second reflection on this. My third, on the question of domestic workers, my friend, the idea of forming unions and formations of domestic workers themselves is to shift the agency. And it does many things. It's not easy. As I just demonstrated in my talk earlier, it's not easy. But what does it do? It builds a feminist solidarity. पता है क्या होता है कि ये मालिक जो है इसके घर पे काम मत करो, ये लड़की के साथ छेड़खानी करता है, रेप करता है, कुछ भी करता है, तो इसके घर में बॉयकॉट कर दो. That's how solidarity, feminist solidarity works. To build power, boycotting work. Yeah, go ahead, please. Okay. Sorry. So what I wanted to say is building domestic workers' own agency. Since your question was focused on domestic workers and why NGOs and some others don't take up some of the more crucial things. So building up those unions and that agency of domestic workers, those collectives of domestic workers, even if they're not unionized for the time that may be, builds that question of essential power and solidarity. Builds a sort of a situation where in practical terms it means women come together, because it's very difficult to do it alone. Women come together to boycott work in particular homes where the owner is abusive, where the owner doesn't let women go to the toilets, where the owner, woman or man or the family, believes in a two-glass system, as you know, rundu glass system of caste untouchability, where the owners, and it's not an easy struggle because you lose your work, right? So, but that builds that solidarity. I know examples where women who have questioned and challenged and boycotted work are fed and supported for some time at least by their own unions and solidarity till she finds another work. But obviously, this is not the norm. Obviously, this is how it needs to expand. It builds that power. So I just want to sort of reflect on and that is why you have an entire middle class opposition to unionism of the idea of unionism of domestic workers. That is why you have an entire sort of tirade of false allegations of theft, of so and so forth, of many other things against domestic workers. That is why you have the processes in the last 10 years where before entering the resident welfare associations and the housing of middle classes, domestic workers have to self-identify and register and take passes. It is an intersectional issue. Who are these domestic workers? We must ask ourselves. Which classes, which castes, which ethnicities are they coming for? How are they stereotyped? We had all those sessions, so I just want to recap that point to you. I'll just end up by saying, recognizing your point to building and construction workers welfare fund. The problem with labor laws is that it merges all of this separate welfare board. Tamil Nadu had a domestic workers welfare board. Yeah, whatever little it offered to domestic workers, it was not cess based, but whatever it was, it's going to be finished. Some other state had a BD workers welfare board. It's going to wrap up. So that's at one level. Now, yes, we must get out the maximum for the construction workers, an expanded definition of construction workers, brick kilns at the starting point, or that kind of sand mining at the starting point, which I referred to the very end of the construction work sector, the skilled work in making buildings. Yes, we must have an expanded definition, which we have after struggles. But also the question is, those benefits of the welfare board, look at the quantum of money in welfare board city-wise and how the state is actively diverting, the state governments are actively diverting that money into other kinds of projects. This experience we have through the SCST sort of funds as well, as you know. How the money is diverted into upper class causes, into building infrastructure in the name of construction workers. So we must fight for that. There are new issues emerging. The other day we launched a report called Climate Justice and Informal Workers. Now, what happens in Delhi? Give an example, air pollution means lockdowns. I'm taking this opportunity just to expand some of the unsaid things. Air pollution means what? A virtual lockdown for construction work. 10 days, 15 days, 20 days. A heat wave means what? Workers cannot work, they consume more water, there's more cost. The government has locked down for some time, period of work, the length of work, therefore wages lost. So on one side, income is lost. On another side, expenses rise, because even if you stay in the Delhi heat and you're not working out there, your house is no better. Your house is really no better because you are in squatter settlements, 10 people to a room, you need a water cooler, you have to hire out a water cooler, you don't get water, you have to pay for the water. Some of the issues I've spoken to already. In such a situation, there's a double whammy. But does the Workers' Welfare Fund at this stage compensate that? Construction Workers' Welfare Fund, BOSF, it doesn't. After a lot of fight, the Delhi government announced some compensation of 6,000 rupees or so per month, I would imagine. I forget the exact figure. After a lot of fight, but how many workers got covered in that? 64 lakhs. And what's the number of construction workers in Delhi? Merely, a few percent of the total number of construction workers for various problems. It's not, you're not registered, your mobile ID, the digital divide you're speaking of, your mobile is not there. So we have to fight for what is there. While the idea is to sort of water down those provisions, at least what is there, you have to fight for it. And that's what the entitlements I was speaking about in a very, sort of synoptic manner. I think that's pretty much my reflections. The others have been very well reflected upon by my co-panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep. Thank you, Sandeep, for reflecting on the questions. I think now that I've failed my job as a moderator, I'll take 2 minutes to point out to some publications which are really important because we did not have enough time to dwell on it. On the Kutumshri and Feminist Solidarity, ActionAid has extensive work which is called From the Realm of Necessity to Realm of Freedom, which talks about how women's work reads to the realm of freedom. It's exclusively based on collective farming in Kerala. It's available on Amazon. Not that I'm supporting cloud capitalism, but I mean, if you want to look at it. On the question of POSH, also we did. I mean, he mentioned about the PGPS, the Union of Domestic Workers in Calcutta. We had extensive study by the Global Partnership Network, which Professor Jha is part of, is also published and availably open format on this thing. You will realize the potential and emancipatory potential that a women union hold for advancing struggle of this thing. There, the examples that Sandeep are giving are extremely mentioned based on interviews on the interaction with the women workers. I think you must read and expand on this thing. I mean, we also did find that local committees across India are not available, and somebody was asking, where does a woman complain if something happens in the house? We have the provision of this local committees available at district level, which are completely unfunctional. That's also something where the struggle needs to do. It binds what Sandeep and Professor Jha has sort of built together, that in order to advance the struggle against capital, we need to both pay attention to the instrumental realities on the ground of entitlements of Ishram, etc., but at the same time not forget the larger sort of struggle that we have, which is this struggle against that accumulation and that capital. With those thoughts, I will invite Dr. Maria Selvan to present a token of her love and appreciation to Professor Jha. It's a tea bag, sir, which have been procured from Wayanad, and it's the women who are part of our livelihood initiatives. Yes, in the aftermath of Wayanad landslide. So, yes. Please take mine. Please take my cameras. So, huge round of applause. Thank you, Professor Jha, for your session and for joining us. We are really glad you could join us from Delhi. It's really a pleasure and honor. Thank you. We proceed for tea and we come back by 11:45. We have around roughly 10 minutes for tea.
Grow from 1 crore in 2024 to 25 to 2.35 crore by 2030, and there is a mention in the Code on Security which provides a legal recognition and supposed social security benefits to gig platform workers. But there are still debates about what is the insurance amount going to be. Will it differ across states? What is the quantum of social security that will be given? There are still many questions around this and really no answers. Then you look at the ILO standards that were introduced on gig workers, there was opposition to them by the US, by India, by Switzerland, saying that no, gig work should remain flexible, and sure, but however, the flexibility does not remain with the worker. It often remains with the employer in how they choose to treat their gig workers. And, that is a reality that is really not taken into account. And we see that like digital labor platforms function in markets through matching the supply and demand for paid work through an online platform relying on algorithms. And how this happens is so collecting vast data not just on the users but also on the workers themselves, you know so we've seen this huge boom in the gig economy. Like Sandeep mentioned in the previous session, post COVID, we've seen these kind of opportunities come up. But what this session will do today is it will bring together voices of gig workers who have led, Sheikh Salahuddin representing gig workers who have led the struggle for recognition as workers, for recognition of their rights, for recognition of the issues, the challenges that they face, and to get some form of, not just rights, but also redressal and grievance mechanisms, which are absent today. So we have with us Sheikh Salahuddin and Miss Nandini Chami. Nandini Chami was meant to join us physically, but unfortunately had some health emergencies and could not be with us. But she's very kindly taken out the time to join us online. So we'll start with Sheikh Salahuddin, who will speak in Hindi, for whom I will translate, and then we will move on to Miss Nandini Chami. I will just take a moment to introduce both our speakers and then hand it over. So Sheikh Salahuddin is a labor organizer and trade union leader working with app-based transport and platform workers since 2012. He's based in Hyderabad and has been organizing drivers since 2014 and has played a key role in building collective platforms for gig workers. He founded the Telangana Four-Wheelers Drivers Association in 2014 and later established the Telangana State Taxi and Drivers Joint Action Committee, bringing together multiple drivers' unions across the state. In 2019, he was elected National General Secretary of the Indian Federation of App-Based Transport Workers, IFAT, a registered trade union representing workers across 15 cities. In 2022, he founded the Telangana Gig and Platform Workers Union, focusing on organizing gig workers across sectors. His work spans collective bargaining, social security, advocacy, and engagement with policy processes on platform labor. And next, we have Ms. Nandini Chami, who is the Deputy Director and Fellow of Research and Policy Engagement at IT for Change. Her work is largely focused on research and policy advocacy in the domains of digital rights and development and the political economy of women's rights in the information society. She is part of the organization's advocacy efforts around the 2030 Development Agenda on issues of data for development and digital technologies and gender justice. She also provides strategic support to IT for Change's Field Center Prakriya, and this includes training programs for women's rights, groups on adopting digital tools in their field practice, and critical education for empowerment for rural adolescent girls. With that, I would like to invite Sheikh Salahuddin to please deliver his.
Good afternoon, everyone. बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया एक्शन एड का और सभी साथियों का जो ऑर्गेनाइज कर रहे हैं सभी का। असल गिग और प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर्स है क्या? असल ये वर्कर्स विजिबल है अनविजिबल है? आप सबको ज्यादा कंफ्यूजिंग होगा। आप लोग ज्यादा गिग और प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर को विजिबल मानते या इनविजिबल मानते? सॉरी, क्या बोले? विजिबल। इनका आमदनी, राइट। मगर बहुत सारे पेपरों में रिपोर्टों में ये लिखा जाता कि गिग वर्कर जो है इनविजिबल है। नहीं, गिग वर्कर विजिबल है, दिखता, उसकी मेहनत भी दिखती मगर उसकी आमदनी नहीं दिखती हम सबको। तो ये चीज हमें जानने की जरूरत है। अगर जब देश भर में अगर जब हम देखेंगे बात करेंगे गिग और प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर्स के बारे में, उनकी इकोनॉमी के बारे में, तो हम थोड़े चीजों पे जान के नहीं जान के भी जो है ना बहुत सारे चीजों में उलझे हुए रहते। पहली बात तो गिग वर्कर्स आया कहाँ से नाम, ये तो सबसे बड़ा सवाल है। लाया कौन इंडिया में ये? अरे गिग ही क्यों लाए, प्लेटफॉर्म ही क्यों लाए? तो इसके ऊपर जो बहस है वो तो पहले से हो रही। क्या गिग और प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर्स हकीकत में जो ड्राइवर है, डिलीवरी बॉय है, अर्बन कंपनी वर्कर है, जो होम बेस्ड वर्कर्स है, जो ऐप बेस्ड काम करते हैं, वो सारे गिग वर्कर बोल के गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया कोड ऑन 2020 में डाल दिए। जब कोड ऑन 2020 आने से पहले 2019 में हम लोग ने नितिन गडकरी जी से मिला था कि ये सारे वर्कर्स को, ऐप बेस्ड वर्कर्स को कहीं ना कहीं मौका दो कानूनी तौर पे इनके लिए। तो कानूनी तौर पे तो नहीं मिला, बट हाँ कोड ऑन सोशल सिक्योरिटी में एक जगह बना के सोशल सिक्योरिटी स्कीम्स के लिए वहां पे मौका दिया गया और वो पार्लियामेंट में बिल पास हुआ 2020 में। 2020 के बाद अब 2026 में खड़े होके हैं हम, आज तक उसका एक भी स्कीम, एक भी बेनिफिट वर्कर को पहुंचा नहीं। रिसेंटली अगर जो आप देखेंगे तो पब्लिक डोमेन में ड्राफ्ट दिया सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट ने, बोला कि आपने इनपुट्स दे दो, हम उसके सजेशंस लेके जल्द से जल्द आपको सोशल सिक्योरिटी स्कीम्स देंगे। और वो क्या स्कीम्स देंगे अभी तक पता नहीं है। जब स्टार्टिंग में कहा गया तो कोर्ट के अंदर कि हम ईएसआईसी देंगे, पीएफ देंगे, हेल्थ देंगे, मेटर्निटी देंगे, जो जो भी देंगे देंगे, बट आज तक भी उसका पूरा एक ढांचा निकल के नहीं आया कि वो वेलफेयर बोर्ड का, नेशनल सोशल सिक्योरिटी का वेलफेयर बोर्ड बनेगा कब, उसके स्कीम्स मिलेंगे कब, और वो फायदा वर्कर लेंगा कब। ये कब कब कभी है, मगर वो होता कब, वो सबसे बड़ा अपॉर्चुनिटी के लिए इंतजार कर रहे हैं। 6 साल बीत गए, प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज लगातार अपने वर्कर्स के साथ शोषण कर रहे हैं, आप सबको पता है। प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज का एक अलग नजरिया है, आप सबको मालूम। पार्टनर्स क्या बोलते वर्कर्स के लिए, प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज वर्कर्स के लिए क्या बोलते? पार्टनर्स, कैप्टन, यूजर, सर्विस प्रोवाइडर, जो जो भी नाम है पूरे नामा लगा देते हैं हमारे पे। मगर क्या हकीकत में हम लोग पार्टनर है? क्या पार्टनर का जो आम हम सब मानते, पार्टनर का मतलब क्या रहता? भागीदारी, हिस्सेदारी, उसमें भी जो शेयर है वो भी हमें मिलना चाहिए। जब प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी का मालिक, जो कंपनी का सीईओ, फाउंडर अपनी आमदनी बढ़ाते जा रही है, अपनी तनख्वाह बढ़ते जा रही है उनकी, तो मेरी भी तो तनख्वाह बढ़ना चाहिए ना। तो हमारी लड़ाई वही है। हम बोल रहे कि आपकी जो तनख्वाह, कोविड पैंडेमिक में भी तनख्वाह आपने ली और अपनी तनख्वाह बढ़ाई आज तक, मगर वर्कर की तनख्वाह क्यों घट रही दिने दिन पे? पहले पर ऑर्डर पे आपको 35 रुपए देते थे। पैंडेमिक की बात कर रहा हूं, कोविड में। कोविड में आपको मालूम है हमारे देश के प्रधानमंत्री साहब बोले कि ये फर्स्ट लाइन फ्रंट क्या है, वॉरियर वर्कर्स है बोल के बोले जी। हाँ, मत वो एक दर्जे से खुश कर दिए। वो बोलते ना, तुमने बोल के खुश किया, हम लोग ने सुन के खुश हो गए। पर फायदा क्या हुआ उसका? कुछ फायदा नहीं हुआ। और वो वर्कर जो अपने कोविड में जान खो गया, जो कोविड के अंदर अटैक होकर उसकी जान चले गई, आज तक कोई प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज उसके साथ नहीं खड़े के हैं। ना सरकार भी खड़े होके। वो तो कठिन दे थे, बहुत बुरे दिन थे, मगर प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी से आपको सबको जस्ट मैं बताना चाह रहा हूँ, जस्ट उसमें ज्यादा डेप्थ में नहीं जाना चाह रहा हूँ बुरे दिनों में, बट याद कराना चाह रहा हूँ कि यही प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज आप सबसे पैसा लेके हम लोग को दिए। ओला ने अपना क्राउड फंड किया, कंज्यूमर्स को बोला कि आप ड्राइवर के नाम पे भीख दे दो, 400 500 800 का स्लॉट दे दिया आपको, एक के लिए ग्रोसरी का इतना पैसा, 4 के लिए इतना पैसा, 6 के लिए इतना पैसा, आप लोग ने पैसा दिया, वो पैसा कितने वर्कर को पहुंचा है अभी तक कोई ट्रांसपेरेंसी नहीं है भाई, और ना कोई इसका हिसाब किताब है। वो किसका पैसा था? कंज्यूमर थ्रो वर्कर का पैसा था। और वो प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी लेके किसको दिए, कहां पे दिए, क्या दिए पता है आपको? उस टाइम पे ग्रोसरीज में उन लोग थोड़ा बहुत दिए पीआर के लिए, मगर क्या दिए? 2 किलो नमक, 1 किलो आटा, 5 किलो चावल, एक एक क्या बोलते हैं दाल की पैकेट 1 केजी की। इससे पूरा कोविड चले गया प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी का। एटलीस्ट ऊबर तो शाम में आके 3,000 रुपए दे दिया, एक बार अकाउंट में डाल दिया, ठन बोल के बस खत्म कर दिया हो। तो ये प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी से अगर जो आप देखेंगे, स्विगी, जोमैटो, अमेजोन, फ्लिपकार्ट जैसे भी, आपको ये बात लिख के रखना चाहिए कहीं पे भी, कोई भी प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी ये नहीं बताया आज तक कि मेरे वर्कर्स, मेरे डिलीवरी बॉयज इतने कोविड से अटैक हो गए, इतने जने अभी हमारे साथ नहीं है बोल के। एक प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी भी नहीं बताई। जहां के पूरे प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज को पता है कि पैंडेमिक में कितने ड्राइवर का इंतकाल हुआ, कितने डिलीवरी वर्कर्स अपनी जान खो गए। आप लोग सब जानते हैं एक ऐप निकला था, वो ऐप का नाम क्या है? गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया निकाली थी जी, नहीं कोविड के लिए, आरोग्य सेतु, राइट? वो सेतु में प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज बहुत म, वो करे थे। आपको बस याद दिलाना चाह रहा हूं, अगर जब मैं एज ए डिलीवरी बॉय हूं, मैं वैक्सीन लिया नहीं लिया, मेरे प्रोफाइल पे एक टिक आता ब्लू कलर का, तो जब भी जाके मैं वैक्सीन लिया बोल के और मैं डिलीवरी के लिए परमिट कर सकता हूँ। और ऐप क्या करता था मेरे लिए कि भाई ये अपार्टमेंट में या ये बिल्डिंग में या फ्लोर में आप कोविड लोग हैं, आप नहीं जा सकते बोल के ऐप मेरे को बता रहा था। फिर उनका घर कैसा चल रहा था, उनके घर पे ग्रोसरी कैसी जा रही थी, उनके घर पे जो नीडली जरूरत थी वो कैसा जा रही थी, यही डिलीवरी बॉय जाके दे रहा था। वो ऐप खाली नाम के वास्ते था, काम नहीं करा था वो वर्कर के लिए। करा तो भी मजबूरन जाके वो डिलीवरी बॉय अपना राशन पानी दे रहा था अपने साथी के लिए। और वो साथी आज हमारे बीचों में कईयों साथी नहीं है, उसकी कहीं पे भी जिक्र नहीं करी गई, ऑफिशियल में रिकॉर्ड में लाया नहीं गया, और प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी आज तक उसके बारे में मुंह फेर के है। खैर मैं ज्यादा उसमें जाना नहीं चाह रहा हूं। जिस तरीके से प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज एक वर्कर को जो है पार्टनर, यूजर, सर्विस प्रोवाइडर बना के जो खेल रहे, इसके अंदर जो नुकसान है वो वर्कर को ही है, प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी को नहीं है। आपको बीते हुए 5 साल की बात बताता हूं, ज्यादा नहीं। अपने आईपीओ कितने रेस करे प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज? बहुत रेस करे ना, मुनाफा तो कमा रहे ना। 5 साल पहले मैं जीएसटी को लेटर लिखा था सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट को, ये पूरे प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज पैसे बन रहे क्या जीएसटी में बोल के। शायद आप लोगों को पेपर में भी देखने के लिए मिलता है, इकोनॉमिक टाइम्स में, उसमें इसमें, कि जीएसटी पे नहीं कर रहे स्विगी और जोमैटो, इनके लिए एक लीगल नोटिस भेजा गया था, जब पूरे प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज नॉन प्रॉफिटेबल एनजीओ चला रहे थे। आज पूरे प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज अपना प्रॉफिट बता रहे, मगर वो प्रॉफिट दिख रहा नहीं, इनविजिबल प्रॉफिट बता रहे, और वो प्रॉफिट पूरा अपना मुनाफा आईपीओ में डाल रहे हैं। और प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी बढ़ते जा रही लगातार, मगर जिसका खून पसीना जिस प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी में वर्कर काम करके दे रहा, वो प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज वर्कर के लिए कुछ भी नहीं फायदा कर रहे। जब वर्कर का एक्सीडेंट होता, जब ये प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज बोलते कि हम इंश्योरेंस दे रहे, जब एक्सीडेंट में इंश्योरेंस नहीं कैसा मिलता वो भी बताता हूं आपको। अगर जब खुदा ना खास मेरे साथ कुछ हादसा हो गया, एक्सीडेंट हो गया, और मैं जाके हॉस्पिटलाइज हो गया, तो मेरा इंश्योरेंस मेरे को मिलना चाहिए ना। क्या कैशलेस मिलना चाहिए या पहले मैं पे करके उसके बाद में कैश में उसका क्लेम लेना चाहिए? कैशलेस मिलना चाहिए ना, क्योंकि परसों दीपेंद्र गोयल बोले ना, 100 करोड़ रुपए उन्होंने इंश्योरेंस पे लगा के रखे उन्होंने। ओके, तो वैसे टाइम पे कितनी अच्छी सर्विस रहना था। इनकी नीयत जो है अपनी प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी कैसा बढ़ाना बोल के है, मगर वर्कर के फेवर में, वर्कर के सपोर्ट में, वर्कर को क्या अच्छे काम कर सकते उसके लिए इन्होंने पॉलिसी नहीं बनाई। और ये प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज कभी भी सरकार के पास हम लोग जब भी शिकायतें डालते, पहली बात तो हम शिकायतें एक 8-10 साल पहले जब हम शिकायत डालते थे तो हमारा डिपार्टमेंट क्या है हमारे को पता नहीं था। लेबर डिपार्टमेंट में कंप्लेंट दिए तो लेबर डिपार्टमेंट बोलता था कि भाई तुम लेबर नहीं है, पार्टनर है। ट्रांसपोर्ट डिपार्टमेंट में जाके जब बोलते थे, ट्रांसपोर्ट डिपार्टमेंट बोलता अरे भाई तेरा मेरा लेना क्या है। आईटी डिपार्टमेंट बोलता है भाई ये मेरी जिम्मेदारी नहीं है, करना है तो करो नहीं तो नहीं। ये ऐप खाली चला रहे हैं लोग अपनी जिंदगी के लिए, किसकी? प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी की जिंदगी के लिए। तो हम लोग को ये समझ में नहीं आया, खाली 5 साल तो हम लोग ये लेटरान देते 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 लव लेटरान के जैसा खाली मोहब्बत में फिदा हो गए प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनियां से। कभी कभी ऑफिसर बोलता था अरे भाई ये क्या लेटरान दे रहे भाई तुम लोग, करना तो क्या करना, कुछ नहीं कर सकते थे। तो लास्ट फाइनली एक इसका निचोड़ निकल के ये आया कि कोड ऑन सोशल सिक्योरिटी तो इम्प्लीमेंट होने वाला नहीं है जब तक तो ये प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज काम करने वाले नहीं है और सरकार की बात सुनने वाले नहीं है। तो उस टाइम पे हम लोग ने रास्ता निकाला कि हम स्टेट गवर्नमेंट पे प्रेशर बनाने की जरूरत है। तो स्टेट गवर्नमेंट पे हम लोग जाके अप्रोच हो रहे थे। पहली बात तो इसके बीच में आप फिर ये नहीं कहना कि सलाउद्दीन कोई कांग्रेसी है। मैं कोई पार्टी का नहीं हूं, मैं इंडिपेंडेंट हूं, मेरे ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस भी इंडिपेंडेंट है। चाहे तेलंगाना गीग एंड प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर्स हो, चाहे इंडियन फेडरेशन ऑफ ऐप बेस्ड ट्रांसपोर्ट वर्कर्स हो, हमारे को कोई पॉलिटिकल पार्टी से ना लेना है ना देना है। मगर भारत जोड़ो यात्रा में एक अच्छी पहल ये निकली, राहुल गांधी जी से चलते चलते उन्होंने हमारी बात सुन ली और उनकी सरकार जहां पे राजस्थान पे था वहां पे पहला कानून बनाने का वादा किया और उन्होंने काम किया और वो हमारी शुरुआत थी। कुछ तो भी मिलना ना, कुछ तो भी मिलना, वो तो कुछ तो भी पकड़ना पड़ता। तो राहुल गांधी को 10 किलोमीटर चल के उनको पकड़ा हाथ, तो कहीं ना कहीं साथ दिए वो। तो उस साथ को लेके हम लोग जो है काम करने की प्रक्रिया बनाई और वहां पे अशोक गहलोत जी सीएम थे, उन्होंने बहुत टाइम बिताया, गिग वर्कर्स की परेशानी सुने, बहुत सारे प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज को भी बुलाया, स्टेक होल्डर मीटिंग सुने। उसमें एक्शन एड जैसे लोग भी थे वहां पे सपोर्ट कर रहे थे हमारे को एक तरफ से, क्योंकि हमारे लिए भी पॉलिसी नई थी, एक दिशा बन रही थी, मगर ये हमारे लिए भी नया था। निखिल डे, अरुणा राय जैसे लोग का भी हम लोग ने वहां पे हेल्प लिया, ये सारे लोग का, सिविल सोसाइटीज का भी हेल्प लिया। आईटी फॉर चेंज जो नंदिनी जी अभी आप हमारे साथ जुड़े हुए नेक्स्ट बात करने वाले, ये सभी लोगों का हम लोग ने हेल्प लेके वहां पे कानून पहला बनाने का कोशिश किया। और वो कानून ज्यादा हम लोग उतनी सोच नहीं थी जितनी अब की सोच बनी। बोलते ना हर चीज स्टेप बाय स्टेप डेवलपमेंट होते रहता बोल के। तो राजस्थान पहला हमारा इंडिया का कानून बना, देश का पहला कानून बना गीग और प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर का। और दूसरा कानून हमारा बना झारखंड में, तीसरा बना बिहार में, चौथा अब रिकॉग्नाइज मिला तेलंगाना में जो कैबिनेट अप्रूव करा 2 दिन पहले। तो 5 स्टेट में आज हमारे कानून बने हुए हैं। लास्ट मंथ में सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट जाके पब्लिक डोमेन में ड्राफ्ट रख के 4 कोडों में से ये भी एक कोड लगा के हमारे को, वो बोलते ना रक्षाबंधन के जैसा बांध दिया उसमें। अब वो ना निकल सकते ना कुछ बाहर बोल सकते, बोले तो भी क्या बोले, नहीं बोले तो भी क्या बोले, बोले सका है। मगर फिर भी कहीं ना कहीं गीग और प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर्स को उसमें रिकॉग्नाइज मिला, कुछ काम होने के अभी तो आसार अंदेशा दिख रहा। और गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया एक कमिटी डाली थी, वो कमिटी में मैं भी एक सोशल सिक्योरिटी स्कीम्स का मेंबर हूँ। और क्या स्कीम्स देना है वो अभी भी हमारे पास हाथ में नहीं है। वही जनधन, ये धन, वो धन, ये वो सब स्कीमा डाल रहे हैं उसमें, मगर ये पैसा जो प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज दे रही उससे हम बेटर स्कीम्स क्या दे सकते हैं बोल के सरकार अभी डिजाइन नहीं कर रही इस चीज पे। ये तो सारे जनधन यंधन वंदन ये धन सब तो मिल रहे स्कीम्स, कहीं ना कहीं वर्कर रजिस्टर होके है। मगर हमें क्या चाहिए सबसे बड़ा, जो प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी दावा कर रही एक्सीडेंटल इंश्योरेंस आपको 10 लाख रुपए मिलेगा, डेथ हो गए तो आपको वो मिलेगा 10 लाख रुपए मिलेंगे। हम चाह रहे कि उससे बढ़ के दे सारी प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज के ऑफर से भी सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट। ये हम लोग सेंट्रल से चाह रहे, सिंपल एक ही लाइन है। और सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट कहीं कानून बनाने की बात नहीं कर रही, ये भी याद रखना। और स्टेट गवर्नमेंट को धमकी मिल रही कि आप कानून मत बनाओ, हम बना रहे, इंतजार करो। वो इंतजार में इंतकाल हो जा रहा फिर वर्कर का। और कर्नाटका एक पहला स्टेट है, रिसेंटली बोर्ड भी बना, फर्स्ट बोर्ड मीटिंग हुई रिसेंट लास्ट मंथ के अंदर। और वहां पे प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज का किस तरीके से बिहेवियर है वो भी बताता हूं, सुन लेना आप। सारे प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज जब सोशल सिक्योरिटी स्कीम की बात आ रही या वर्कर की बेनिफिट की बात आ रही, तो ये प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज अपना वर्कर का डेटा, जो मेरा राइट्स है, जो मेरा डेटा है, वो सरकार को देने में पीछे हट रहे। अब सरकार करेगे तो क्या करे, वो स्कीम तो इंप्लीमेंट करना है, कुछ तो देना है वर्कर के लिए, स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स या चाहे सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट भी हो। पर आज तक वो डेटा जो है वर्कर्स का प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी सरकार को नहीं दे पा रहे। और सरकार जो है, चाहे वो सेंट्रल में हो स्टेट में हो, अंदाजन मेरे प्लेटफॉर्म पे एग्जांपल स्विगी हो, जोमेटो हो, अर्बन कंपनी हो, कितने लोग काम कर रहे, वो डेटा मिलेंगे तो ही सरकार कुछ स्कीम्स बनाएंगे ना, कुछ पॉलिसी बनाएंगे आगे मिलके उसके ऊपर। कितने लोग को इंश्योरेंस लेना है, कितने लोग को हम कवर कर सकते, कितना अंदाजन पैसा ले सकते, ये सारा चीज अभी भी अधूरा होके है, क्योंकि डेटा के ऊपर है। और बात रही सेस और पे आउट पे मसला, जो बोर्ड के अंदर पैसा आने का है वर्कर के वेलफेयर के लिए, एक प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी का तबका जो है पे आउट पे है, एक तबका राइड हेलिंग का जो है प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज का पर ट्रांजैक्शन पे है। समझ रहे ना आप? इस तरीके से जो है डिवाइड एंड रूल, फिर ये सब एक जगह मिलके गल्ले कहाँ मिलते मालूम? नेस्कॉम पे, सीआईआई पे। अब इनके बड़े प्लेटफॉर्म्स है वो। जब वर्कर को बोला जाता हम सब जॉइंटली मूवमेंट होके एक कट्ठा, आईफैट एक फेडरेशन है, वैसी बात करने के ऊपर आता, नहीं 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 नहीं, यूनियन से बात नहीं करते हम, एम्प्लॉय एम्प्लॉय रिलेशनशिप नहीं है, सरकार को भी चिट्ठी भेजते, अगर जो आप हमारे को बुला रहे मीटिंग के लिए, याद रख लो ये आप इलीगल बुला रहे, आपको यहाँ पे बुलाने की वो नहीं है, इन लोगों का रिलेशनशिप नहीं है। इस तरीके के धमकियां स्टेट गवर्नमेंट को मिलते प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी से, और यूनियन से हम बात ही नहीं करते। फिर मगर इन लोगों जाके नेस्कॉम में, फिक्की में और क्या सीआईआई में कई को मेंबरशिप लेके अपना यूनियन खड़े कर रहे वहां पे। आप लोग करे तो चमत्कार, हम लोग करे तो वो है। ये कहां का इंसाफ है? और ये प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनियां सरकारों को कैसा प्रेशर लगाते हैं आपको वो भी बता दूं मैं, जो 5 स्टेट में लगा के रखे। अगर जो आप लोग कानून बनाए, ये कानून के दायरे में ये चीजें यूनियन के मान लिए, हम चले जाते घर वापसी के जैसा, वो रुस के जाती नहीं, दुल्हन अपने मायके को गए ऐसा ससुराल को, वैसी मीटिंग में से भी नहीं 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 हम नहीं करेंगे, हम आपका स्टेट छोड़ के जाएंगे। कहां छोड़ के गए बाबा? 5 स्टेट में से कौन सा स्टेट छोड़ के गए बताओ आप? जाने वाले नहीं है, तुम यहाँ के हैं, यहाँ पे मोहर लगा के रखे आपको हम लोग, आप जाते नहीं, आपको जाने भी नहीं देते हम लोग। मगर मेरा इन लोगों से सीधा सवाल का जवाब यही है, हम लोग हक मांग रहे हमारा, ना कि प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी की कोई अगेंस्ट है। हम बोल रहे कि आप मार्केट में बिजनेस करो, जैसा अभी इससे पहले के पैनल में हम सुने थे, हम बोल रहे कि प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज को अपॉर्चुनिटी है, आओ यहाँ पे कारोबार करो, यहाँ पे बिजनेस दो, गिग इकोनॉमी बढ़ाओ, उसके भी हम हिस्सेदार है, उसके हम भागीदार है, क्योंकि उसमें हमारा खून पसीना है, जब भी जाके आपकी प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी यहाँ पे खड़े होके है। सही है, मैं झूठ बोल रहा हूं? अगर जब कोई वर्कर काम नहीं कर रहा उसमें प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी में, क्या वो प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी इतनी जल्दी से तेजी बढ़ा सकती क्या? क्या इस मंच पे पहुंच सकती क्या? इट्स पॉसिबल? सही है, हो सकता। इसके अंदर किसका मेहनत खून पसीना है समस्या? आप सीईओ का, जो बोर्ड रूम में बैठ के डिसाइड करता, जो मेहनत में बारिश में खून पसीना अपना पहरा रहा, जो रात दिन मेहनत कर रहा, उसका है। इसमें कंट्रीब्यूशन किसका ज्यादा है? प्लीज मैं सुनना चाह रहा हूं आपसे, किसका ज्यादा है जी? वर्कर्स का। तो उनको उनका ईमानदारी का हक का पैसा मिलना चाहिए या नहीं? यही आवाज कर रही यूनियन, यही आवाज पूछ रही, और ये हक की आवाज ही पूछ रही, ना कि हम इनसे पूरा घर पूछ रहे मेरे को डबल बेडरूम चाहिए, या मेरे को 100 गज का जमीन दे दो, या मेरे लिए डिलेक्स फ्लैट दे दो। ये हम नहीं मांग रहे इनसे। मैं मांग रहा हूं कि मेरा खून पसीने का पैसा जो है वो हिसाब और ईमानदारी से दो, और मेरे पे जो एल्गोरिथम आप फिक्स कर रहे उससे दूर रखो। आप कौन होते मेरे पे एल्गोरिथम लगाने वाले? मैं और 4 साथी यहाँ पे बिजनेस कर रहे, और वो साथी जो है अभी आके मेरे सामने है, आप उनको राइट दे रहे, मैं 1 घंटे से बैठा हूं, मेरे को राइट नहीं है। और वो गाड़ी आपकी लीज की व्हीकल है, जो उबर एवरेस्ट उबर मुंह में चलती, आप उसको पहले बिजनेस दे रहे, मेरे को बिजनेस नहीं दे रहे। ये कहाँ का इंसाफ है? ये चीज पे हम बोल रहे कि एल्गोरिथम नहीं होना चाहिए। जब डेटा डेटा ट्रांसपेरेंसी नहीं है मेरे फेयर के ऊपर। ओला तो मेरा 1-1 रुपया 2-2 रुपये चुराता रोज हर राइड पे, शाम तक मैं हिसाब करे तो 10 रुपए का चोर बनता हो। अब मैं उसको कहां पे लेके आके खड़े करूं? डिजिटल पूरा। अब वो डिजिटल से हमारे जैसे भाइयों को बुक पेन पेपर पकड़ के, जैसा आप लोग सुबह से शाम तक मेहनत करते, वैसा ड्राइवर हर राइड का लिख सकता क्या हिसाब किताब? डिलीवरी बॉय लिख सकता क्या शाम तक? कारोबार कब करेंगे? अपना पैसे का हिसाब कब लिखेंगे? कोई ट्रांसपेरेंसी नहीं है। इंश्योरेंस पे पैसा मेरा काटते, आप बोलते कि इंश्योरेंस में फुगट में दे रहा हूं। कंज्यूमर से आप पैसे लेके बोलते कि राइट पे इंश्योरेंस काट रहे, वहां पे बोलते कि आप इंश्योरेंस ही नहीं, वर्कर प्लेटफॉर्म कोई इंश्योरेंस ही नहीं ले रहा कंज्यूमर से। और आपका जो बिजनेस है वो बिजनेस को सुधारो बोल रहे हैं हम। किस तरीके का बिजनेस है? आपने 10 मिनट की डिलीवरी लगाई, उसको क्या समझ के रखे आप? वो तो इंसान है ना, रोबो थोड़ी है, या नहीं तो क्या बोलते हो, ड्रोन थोड़ी है वो। इंसान हूं मैं भी आप लोगों के जैसा। दीपेंद्र गोयल को तकलीफ हुई, एक क्या है वो कोई शॉपिंग मॉल में उनको आने नहीं दिए गए थे, बैग डाल लिए, तो उन्होंने मैडम को लेके दोनों गए थे। उन्होंने बोले, मैंने बोला वो मैं मेरी गर्लफ्रेंड के साथ एंट्री मारा था इसमें शॉपिंग मॉल में, मेरे को आने नहीं दिए बोल के। तो वैसी जमीन पे उतर के वर्कर्स की प्रॉब्लम सुनो और वर्कर के प्रॉब्लम को रिजॉल्व करो। 10 मिनट की डिलीवरी में अगर जब खाना आपके घर पे नहीं आया, ग्रोसरी आपके घर पे नहीं आया, तो क्या वो किसी की जान जा रही क्या? आज तो 10 मिनट में ना एम्बुलेंस आ रहा ना मेडिसिन आ रहा सर। 10 मिनट में हार्ट अटैक आ गया तो उसको वो क्या बोलते वो सीपीआर करने भी टाइम लग रहा, उससे पहले तुम डिलीवरी मंगा रहे। आप यकीन नहीं मानते, मैं आप लोगों को भी बोलना चाह रहा हूं, प्लीज आप लोग ये चीजें थोड़े खाने की चीजें अवॉइड करो जो 10 मिनट में आ रहे हैं आपके पास। क्योंकि मैं आप लोगों को बोल रहा हूँ इस बंद कमरे में, अगर जब वो खाना आप देखेंगे तो नहीं खा सकते मेरे भाई, क्योंकि आप सब यहाँ पे यंग स्टूडेंट्स है, फ्यूचर ऑफ आप देश के आगे लेके जाने वाले सब लोग हैं। ये खाना अगर जब आप देखेंगे तो खा नहीं सकते, प्रॉब्लम वो है। और इसके अंदर हमें देखना चाहिए क्योंकि वो हाइजेनिक खाना है नहीं है। बस मैं ज्यादा उसमें नहीं बोलना चाह रहा हूं, बस समझदार को इशारा काफी, ठीक है? तो बस देख लेना उस चीज पे। और दूसरी बात, जो कानून हम लोग बना रहे, जो कानून अभी बना हुआ है, जो सेंट्रल पे जो बात चल रही, स्टेट में जो चल रही, यहाँ पे जो है वर्कर्स की जो तकलीफें परेशानियां सुनाने के लिए अगर जब मैं शुरू करूं तो पूरा एक दिन राम कथा के जैसा पूरा दिन लग जाता। अब मेरे को दिए 15-20 मिनट टाइम, 5 मिनट टाइम फिर से बता रहे आई जी, तो मेरे पास बहुत टफ चैलेंज है बोलने के लिए। मगर फिर भी मैं आप लोगों को बोलने की एक कोशिश इसलिए कर रहा हूं कि वर्कर की जो तकलीफें जो परेशानी है, जो हम मेरे से पहले इस प्लान सेशन में सुने, तो जो वेलफेयर बोर्ड बना जा रहा, वो वेलफेयर बोर्ड में किस तरीके के चीज़ा होना चाहिए, बिल्डिंग एंड कंस्ट्रक्शन वर्कर बोर्ड इसलिए फेल्यूर है, वहां पे ट्रांसपेरेंसी नहीं है। मगर यहाँ पे आपको ट्रांसपेरेंसी है, यहाँ पे डेटा है। जब तक आप डेटा सरकार को शेयर नहीं कर सकते, वो डेटा से हमारा हिसाब और किताब जुड़ता नहीं। और ये बोर्ड एकदम ट्रांसपेरेंसी ट्राइपार्टेट बोर्ड रखे यहाँ पे हम लोग। यहाँ पे हम लोग ये नहीं बोले कि हम प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज को मत बिठाओ, हम बोले कि प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज को भी बिठाओ, सरकार भी रहेंगी और यूनियन भी रहेंगी और सिविल सोसाइटी से भी कोई रहेंगे। तो हम लोग ने इतना हेल्थली बना के रखा बोर्ड, मगर प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज बैठ के बातचीत करने के लिए, सुनने के लिए नहीं है। सरकार बुला रही, परसों एक पोर्टर ने एक स्टेटमेंट दिया हमारी गवर्नमेंट को तेलंगाना में। उन्होंने क्या करे, सीएमओ ऑफिस से लेटर आया, तो वो रंगारेड्डी, हैदराबाद का रंगारेड्डी को वांटेडली लिखे कि रंगारेड्डी में केस देखा जाए, इसकी हेयरिंग किया जाए। तो पोर्टर क्या जवाब देता मालूम, ये रंगारेड्डी का, हैदराबाद का केस रंगारेड्डी वाले को कहीं को दिए सर, मैं आपके जुडिशियर में नहीं आ तुम। अच्छा, और एक बात, में एम्प्लॉय एम्प्लॉय रिलेशनशिप नहीं है, मैं आपसे आके बात नहीं कर सकता हूँ इस चीज में। इस तरीके का पोर्टर का बिहेवियर है। और एक बात मजे की बताता हूँ, जो आईडीज डीएक्टिवेट हो रहे, जो ब्लॉक करते, 5 मिनट और ले तुम, बस 5 मिनट। आईडीज जो ब्लॉक हो रहे वर्कर्स के, उसमें स्पेशली मैं अर्बन कंपनी के वर्कर जो वुमेन दीदी है उनकी बात करना चाह रहा हूँ, जो अभी होम बेस्ड वर्कर्स पे भी आए, मेड्स, इंस्टा मेड बोल के, ठीक है, मैं उस पर भी आना चाह रहा हूँ। आप यकीन नहीं मानते, 50,000 रुपए डाल के ब्यूटिशियन वो स्पा का जो किट है वो खरीदते उन लोग, और उनकी आईडी एक हफ्ते के अंदर ब्लॉक कर देती है अर्बन कंपनी। ये कहाँ का इंसाफ है बताइए आप। और वो दीदी सिंगल भी है, या नहीं तो अपने फैमिली से लड़के, या नहीं तो कुछ अपने फैमिली के हालात अच्छे नहीं रहे कि बाहर निकल के कुछ काम करना चाह रहे अपने पैरों पे खड़े होके, आप सडन उनकी आईडी ब्लॉक कर दिए। उनका जो पहले से ब्यूटिशियन शॉप था वो सब कुछ उन्होंने अपना बंद कर दिया, शट डाउन कर दिया आपके प्लेटफॉर्म पे आके। आप उनको क्या भरोसा दे रहे, क्या जॉब गारंटी दे रहे? आईडी ब्लॉक। ड्यू प्रोसेस के बगैर आईडी ब्लॉक नहीं होना चाहिए। विदाउट ड्यू प्रोसेस आईडीज, चाहे कोई भी प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी करो, चाहे ओला, उबर, रैपिडो, स्विगी, जोमेटो, अमेजोन, फ्लिपकार्ट, अर्बन, जो भी है होम बेस्ड सर्विसेज, ये नहीं होना चाहिए। और इसके ऊपर भी हम लोग स्टैंड लेके हैं। जब स्ट्राइक हुआ था 25 और 31 के दिन, आप लोग बेहतरीन जानते जिस तरीके से हम लोग ने स्ट्राइक किया, वो सिर्फ प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज को हमने बोला कि ये ट्रेलर है, पिक्चर अभी बाकी है। वो ट्रेलर में चुन लोग प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज, एक तो 25 तारीख से 1 तारीख का टाइम दिए थे हम लोग, 5 दिन के अंदर प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी नहीं आई। फिर भी हमारी डिमांड उस दिन रखे थे, और उसमें करीब 2.5 लाख लोग उसके अंदर पार्टिसिपेंट हुए थे। फिर सुबह प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी ने, खैर स्विगी तो अपना लिस्ट नहीं भेजा बाहर, जोमेटो ने अपनी लिस्ट भेज के बोला कि हम लोग ने इतने राइट्स मारे, इतना करे, और हमने कहीं पे कुछ भी नहीं किया। अरे पागलों, मजिल पावर यूज करे, मैन पावर यूज करे, फाइनेंशियल पावर, हाँ वो क्या नाम है, वो तमन्ना अमिताभ बच्चन को लाए ऐड पे, मैं पूरे ट्विटर पे लिखा @TGPW पे, देखो आप पूरे प्रूफ लगाया। ये सब की चीजा नहीं है। आपने बोला कि पीआर नहीं करा इनसे, यकीन मानते आप, एक ऑर्डर पे 150 रुपया मिला, एक ऑर्डर पे 150 रुपया। प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी इनाग्रेशन के टाइम पे भी नहीं दिया होगा उतना पैसा पर ऑर्डर पे। तो ये हमारी जीत नहीं होती क्या भाई, बताओ। और प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज का बिहेवियर देखेंगे, जोमेटो का जो जिस तरीके से दीपेंद्र गोयल ने अपना गुस्सा, अपनी आक्रोश पूरा उन्होंने डाला था, मैंने उनको लिंक्डइन पे जवाब दे दिया हर चीज का। मैं लड़ना नहीं चाहता हूं, मैं मोहब्बत आपस में बढ़ाना चाह रहा हूं कि आप लाओ, बैठ के बातचीत करो और हमारी आवाज सुनो वर्कर की। हम आपके एंटी अगेंस्ट नहीं होते, हम आपसे बात करना चाह रहे, आप हमारे से भी बात करो। मगर क्या हुआ, शर्मिंदगी के नाते एक दूसरा बात बोलते हुए उन्होंने अपना इस्तीफा दे दिया, क्योंकि वो ज्यादा दुकान नहीं चल रही थी वहां पर उनकी, क्योंकि उनका काउंटडाउन रिवर्स में जा रहा था। आज भी आप यकीन नहीं मानते भाई, बहुत सारे जने जोमेटो ने अनइंस्टॉल कर दिया, वर्कर वहां पे ऑर्डर नहीं दे रहे। इसका बिहेवियर सेंस यही है। मगर मैं ये नहीं चाहता हूं कि प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी से ये हो, मगर ये मैं चाहता हूं कि जैसे 7 तारीख के दिन भी आप देखे होंगे, परसों फरवरी 7 को ब्रेकडाउन किया, उसमें 6.5 लाख वर्कर ने पार्टिसिपेट किया पूरे पैन इंडिया में। और हमारे अखबार हम भी ऐसे सॉरी टू से थोड़े अखबार बहुत अच्छी तरीके से लिखते हैं मगर थोड़े अखबार अपने एडों के लिए चंद एडों के लिए नहीं लिख पाते। वही हफ्ते के अंदर आप देखें तो फ्रंट लाइन पे ब्लिंकिट का बहुत बड़ा ऐड आ जाता, जेप्टो का बहुत बड़ा ऐड आ जाता, और वो हम नहीं बोल सकते बट हमारी तकलीफ है। जो हमारी जो मेहनत है वो प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज किस तरीके से अपना दबदबावा चाहे इलेक्ट्रॉनिक मीडिया पे हो, प्रिंट मीडिया पे हो, चाहे वो उस पे हो करते, मगर सोशल मीडिया आज के तारीख में बहुत ताकतवर है और उसका कारण आप सब लोग हैं यहाँ पर। तो उसके लिए हम लोग यहाँ पे आप लोगों से मैं सिर्फ यही बोलना चाह रहा हूँ आखिर के अंदर कि वर्कर्स को वर्कर के तरह देखो, ना कि रोबो के तरह। अभी तो अगले आने वाले दिनों में ड्राइवरलेस कार्स आ रहे, ड्रोन्स आने वाले हैं, मगर इसके ऊपर भी हमें सोचना चाहिए कि क्या हमें इस चीज के ऊपर अगले आने वाले फ्यूचर ऑफ वर्क के ऊपर जो डाइवर्ट हो रहा, जो कन्वर्ट हो रहा, यहाँ पे बेरोजगारी बढ़ने वाली है या कम होने वाली है, और ये बेरोजगार को रोजगार पे कैसा लगा सकते हैं, ये चीज पे हमें सोचने की जरूरत है। मैं आप सबसे इजाजत चाहता हूँ। बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया, आपने मेरे को यहाँ पे बुलाया और अपनी बात रखने का मौका दिया। थैंक यू सो मच।
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद शेख जी। मैं जल्दी से अनुवाद कर देती हूँ आपकी बात का। ओके, सो Sheikh Salahuddin started by asking, what are gig or platform workers? Are we visible or invisible? Many reports call us invisible, but we are truly visible. Our hard work is visible. We are visible on the streets every day, all the time when we're going to make deliveries. And when we talk about them, where did this nomenclature even come from? Why this name? Why are we using the word gig? This is important to note because later also you will realize the implications of this. But he mentioned that the Code on Wages 2020 all put put every worker or platform worker under this category, gig workers, and this kind of classification or this word um, has created a lot of confusion for them to access certain rights and entitlements, also because platform companies will label them as partners or captains without any real ownership over the work or the profits, etc. So anyway, he mentioned that they met Nitin Gadkari because when the bill was passed, when the Code on Wages in 2020 came about, however, it's 2026 now, no benefits have reached. There was mention of ESI, there were mention of maternity benefits, etc. in the code, but there are no rules existing on the ground for the actual implementation. Then he said that these terms of partners and captains would imply an equal share or splits in profit, which does not happen. He mentioned during COVID, the Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister, called gig workers as frontline workers. However, that also did not really create any benefit. It was more of a tokenistic sort of this valor awarded to gig workers. And they were given rupees 35, 35 रुपए बोला था ना, हाँ, 35 rupees per order. And then he also mentioned that how these platform companies in fact took money from customers via crowdfunding and said that which he termed as driver ke naam pe bheek, begging under the guise of saying, oh, we will provide benefits or ration kits to the drivers, but where did the money go? There was no transparency of how it was used, and even the way it was used was rather pathetic. He said they were given a ration kit which contained 2 kgs of salt, 5 kgs of rice, 1 kg of atta, and 1 packet of dal, which was meant to last them the entire lockdown. Then he mentioned Uber gave a sum of 3,000 rupees transfer into the bank accounts, and that was it. So the companies washed their hands off of any responsibility of their workforce, who they refused to accept as workforce. He said that there was no mention of how many people, how many delivery people lost their lives while working during COVID. Then he mentioned Arogya Setu app, how the app would only allow delivery people who have been vaccinated to go and make deliveries, and it would share this information that, oh, in this apartment complex on this floor a family is infected with COVID, so you cannot go. However, out of necessity, people would still have to go and make that delivery at that house. So it was not avoidable. He said that the Arogya Setu app did not actually help workers in any way. Then he talked about how these platform companies, they put their money into IPOs. They share their invisible profits. They put them in IPOs. They're not working for benefits of the workers. And then he said that if I were to have an accident tomorrow, what should happen? Should I get a cashless insurance, or should I first pay and then have to claim it? And most of the rooms said cashless. And then he said, but when we take these demands forward, we're swatted away by various departments, because the labor department will say you are not labor, you are a partner. The IT department will say we don't have anything, we don't have any jurisdiction over you, who are you? So this is also a major struggle that they have been undergoing. They said that we have written countless letters, almost like writing love letters, and it has just become like a serial affair where none of these departments are actually able to implement anything because of this anomalous sort of classification that gig workers continue to face. Then he gave examples of how he said that he does not align with any political party. However, they have reached certain gains by doing advocacy with certain political actors. And one of the examples that he shared was of the Bharat Jodo Yatra, where he walked for 10 kilometers and was able to express the concerns, the struggles of the gig workers to Rahul Gandhi, after which they secured a meeting with Ashok Gehlot, where there were multiple partners who supported the gig workers. He mentioned IT for Change, he mentioned Nikhil Day, Aruna Roy, he mentioned ActionAid, and how then after this meeting, we have seen some successes where states have come out with regulations. So he mentioned Jharkhand, Bihar, Rajasthan, Karnataka, and Telangana. But then he continued to ask that what are the schemes, like he said, Jan Dhan, etc., e-Shram, etc. Of course, we would be registered, but what are the specific schemes or support that is required by gig workers, and an example of which is a higher accident insurance. Then, so he mentioned, what is it that we want? 10 lakh accident insurance, for example. And then he mentioned that we want that the central government's welfare should be higher and better than what these platform companies are offering. He said that this cannot be instrumentalized until data on workers is not given to the government by platform companies who actually do have this data but are not passing it on. And he said that these companies, they meet at big platforms like NASSCOM, etc. But they evade talking to unions, and they evade talking to workers by saying that, oh, there is no employer-employee relationship between us. We are not mandated to speak to the union, so we will avoid. They use pressure tactics on state governments by saying that, oh, if you put these regulations on us and you ensure that we provide these rights to the workers, we will leave your state, we will exit your state, and we will not continue to work here. To which he said, which company has left which state? That they're saying that we are ready to work, we welcome the gig economy, we will work together, but we're simply asking for what is our right. He said, we don't oppose platform companies, we want to be co-owners. We are participants in this gig economy. We are co-owners in this gig economy, and we want to sit together. And he has multiple times he said this, that we offer a more collaborative approach, but it is the platform companies that refuse to partake in this collaborative approach. He said, we're not asking for much. We're asking for what is our due. He said, please keep your algorithms away from us, because the algorithm, anyway, there is a algorithmic bias, which I hope Nandini will be able to share more about. I'm sure Nandini will be able to share more about in her talk, but priority is given to aggregator platforms and not the people. He said that, where is the transparency? Can a delivery person sit and make note of every transaction, every earning of the day? Or are they expected to do that, or make the deliveries and do business, Then he also said that what is this obsession and this consumerist lifestyle and comfort of 10-minute delivery? Even ambulances and medicines don't reach in 10 minutes. Why is it that we want our food to reach in 10 minutes? And he also issued some friendly advice that please don't consume this food that is reaching you in 10 minutes. He's saying we are calling for a tripartite board. We want that the government, the union, and platform companies sit together. Then he mentioned the issues of IDs being deactivated. He mentioned this whole Insta-maid concept and beauty parlors, where you get a beautician to come home. They are expected to pay 50,000 rupees to purchase that beauty kit. But urban company, without any due process, will block their ID within a week. And these women often shut down their own businesses to join as, beauticians with platform workers. But there's no due process followed. And this is one more of their demands. So tripartite board, and then IDs being blocked only after a due process. It should not be blocked in a flip flippant manner. He said that platform companies use muscle power, financial power. They brought in Amitabh Bachchan also to do ads, etc. But they did a very successful flash strike as well, which he has shared details about. It was done in December and February. Then he also mentioned that he wrote to Dipender Goyal on LinkedIn, offered a collaborative approach, but over there also there was no, they didn't make any strides with him. And after which he resigned, citing some other reasons. On Feb 7, 6.5 lakh gig workers participated in the strike. He's made an appeal to the room saying, please view workers as workers and not as machines. And thank you very much. माफी चाहती हूँ अगर कुछ रह गया हो मेरे से, ठीक है? But now we'll move to Nandini. And after that, Nandini, I would request you if you could take 15 minutes so that we have more time for discussion amongst the participants and we can take some questions also. Thank you.
Thank you. I also wanted to say that I don't need my slides right now because a number of issues have come up in the discussion so eloquently put forth by Sheikh Bhai and in your own framing of the discussion. And I would just like to begin by talking about some additions to what has already been said. Since from this angle, I'm not able to see all of you. In case you have a problem with the audio or you lose me or something, please do alert me and also give me a verbal cue for the total time available, etc. towards the end of this, right? I just wanted to say that IT for Change is a civil society organization, and it is from this location that I'm bringing some thoughts into the debate. The mandate of IT for Change is to work on digital justice, looking at how social justice and gender equality can be furthered in the way digital economy and society are taking shape. And we believe that as a civil society organization, our appropriate task is to bring evidence to kind of make what workers' organizations are talking about something that cannot be dismissed by those in power, and also to research policy proposals that would be appropriate and responding to the issue at hand. It is from this standpoint, and we've been working on this issue since 2019, 2020 on platform economy and workers' rights issues. And from this work, I will bring some reflections. So firstly, let us look at what is happening to work in the Indian landscape and why this issue is such a pressing issue. If you look at the data from India's economic survey of 2025 and 2026, workers in the gig sector are actually 12 million in this fiscal year, and this is rapidly growing, this sector. And future growth rate is also projected to be very high. But most shockingly, and this is something Sheikh Ji pointed out in his talk, and it came out again, and it was acknowledged by the economic survey also in their report. 40% of gig workers report earning below 15,000 rupees per month. Look at how much value from the worker the platforms are extracting, and look at the exploitation. 15,000 per month, is that even a fraction of the value that workers are generating for the platform, as Sheikh Bhai said? Coming to the third point here, the economic survey makes a very interesting observation. The goal of gig economy policy should be to reshape the terms so that workers exercise real choice rather than being pushed into gigs due to weak demand, skill mismatch, or the absence of a safety net. Now, what is the factor governing the choice of the workers in platform work environment? It's very evident this is the algorithmic frontier, right? Because in platform work environments, everything about the conditions of work is governed by the algorithm. Here, I want to caution to two things. When we are talking about algorithmic management, instantly in our mind, we tend to think of an autonomous software or program, a boss bot, whose workings neither managers nor workers can fully comprehend, and this is rather misleading. The way instead we should think about algorithmic management is as a constellation where multiple components are put together, relationships are established between them to organize and control work, and we must recognize algorithms as assemblages which have technical human components and organizational practices also. What this means is that in order to understand what this algorithmic work management is about, we need to bring the lens of power to it to understand who is designing this environment, who is benefiting, and whose interests are served by the entire assemblage. Along with the National Law School of India University, Bangalore, IT for Change had carried out a research study looking at platform workers' experiences of algorithmic management in India over the past 1 year. And we released this report in early 2026. This report is called There is No Ghost in the Machine. And I'm also bringing some particular data points from this report, which are evidence from the ground. The report used a particularly specific qualitative methodology, and we interviewed nearly 30 plus workers across different Indian cities, covering warehouse operations, urban services, ride-hailing, food delivery, and union organizers working in these settings as well. We also wanted to thank IFAT because they also helped us in making this study possible. And this is an area IFAT has been talking about for a long time as something that is important for evidence from the ground to be generated on what is happening in these algorithms. So now quickly coming to the insights from the study. Sheikh Bhai said a very powerful thing, that we should understand that workers are workers and they are not machines. And this is actually what algorithmic management is reducing workers to, where workers are just becoming appendages or extensions of some platform machine. This is not anything new. In Marxist theoretical tradition and in political economy analysis, you might have read or heard about the concept of machinic disposition, where management techniques using technology start stripping away all agency and autonomy from the worker. And this is what our study increasingly proved, that what is happening here is particular type of algorithmic disposition, which is almost like a despotic regime where the worker has absolutely no agency. And we had evidence of 3 specific aspects in which this regime of disposition operates. Firstly, algorithmically determined targets. In Amazon warehouses, for instance, Amazon uses a system called ADAPT, which requires workers to scan 1,200 items per hour while simultaneously loading trucks. This is a rather unrealistic target, to say the least, and any failure or damage caught by surveillance leads to blacklisting. In Urban Company, for instance, there is an auto acceptance feature that is there in the platform setting. So what happens in this auto acceptance mode is workers are automatically assigned orders for the day, removing the worker's ability to accept or reject tasks. Opting out is nearly impossible without penalty, and people often end up accepting or using this auto acceptance feature without being fully made clear by the platform's terms that if you come on an auto acceptance mode because of the promise of incentives or something, these cancellation penalties will still happen. That is not revealed properly. That's a very big problem. Look at Zomato, for instance, where algorithms are strategically used in its incentive gaming, where delivery workers who are close to meeting their daily bonus targets, Zomato strategically withholds orders from them, making it impossible for them to meet the target in order to get the extra incentive. And this is gamification of the worst anti-worker kind, and workers are actually recognizing platforms are doing this to them. Their experience is showing this, and this is what the evidence suggests. Coming to the second way in which this despotism of algorithms operates, there are rating systems that are absolutely arbitrary. So 3 examples here. our research found that when you look at tiered slot allocation on platforms like Swiggy, workers are grouped into bronze, silver, and gold tiers based on ratings and cancellations. I also wanted to mention here that the data for this we collected in October, November. By the time the research was, completed and finalized, a new form of tiered gamification had started happening. So they go on rapidly changing this, before we can catch up on the evidence or deciphering this. We referring to the workers or the civil society organizations backing the workers' movements and even policymakers. Now, what happens is that if you have ratings where you are in the gold tier or in the highest rank, you can book slot days in advance. You can say, I'll work on these days, not on these days. Others end up competing for slots that disappear in peak hours. Now, there is an asymmetric impact also that, there is the promise of the platform that if you get a rating above 4.5 plus in urban company, you will actually end up getting an increasing earnings or benefits. But there is no such benefit that all workers have experienced. Some say despite maintaining rating with great effort, there was no increase in the number of jobs assigned and things like that. And this arbitrary account deactivation, if some customer who is unhappy, kind of like, just gives you a rating below a particular threshold and over time your ratings drop, this arbitrary deactivation fear is a very serious problem. Then when you look at scoring on supposedly fair platforms, you might have all heard of this platform called Namayatri, which is supposed to be an alternative way of managing the platform design compared to Uber and other things, where essentially the idea is it's a subscription model and per transaction, commission is not being taken. This is the claim of Namayatri, and Namayatri is relatively better compared to other very mainstream platforms. However, workers point out that even in Namayatri, despite all its good intentions, there is still a rating system that they have just in the design taken on that method, and cancellations lead to workers being flagged by the algorithm, resulting in fewer available ride offers and a punitive scoring system in operation. So purportedly fair platforms also end up playing maybe inadvertently or accidentally into these rating games and gamification that algorithm has made the default work culture. And finally, in this case, when you look at the ubiquitous data surveillance, in Amazon's Manesar warehouse, the ADAPT system and network of 1,000 CCTV cameras monitoring every moment, and they're counting even milliseconds of idle time to enforce discipline. Similarly, there are also reports from workers that location-based platforms like Swiggy are using GPS dashboards at the back end to identify clusters of delivery works, and if delivery workers are congregating somewhere, we know that workers, when they congregate, that is when they talk, they associate. I mean, this is very important for the collective right to organize. But between work, if they find workers aggregating in one spot, algorithmically they dispatch them in opposite directions. This is what workers' experiences are showing, that these kind of tactics which are opaque and not revealed are being practiced. Coming to the second main insight from our study, for the worker, the experience becomes one, and it is reduced to one of pervasive algorithmic anxiety. This is the default state of being, and this is deliberately engineered by algorithms that are intentionally opaque. Urban companies' algorithm sorts premium and normal work using hidden criteria, which is never disclosed to workers. Designed unfairness. Features like Zomato's route home option often assign distant orders instead of routing the worker home. This extends work hours, and while customer-side app limitations default to just penalizing workers at the cost of customers most of the time. And if you look at accountability voids, in Amazon's warehouse, there is a My Voice grievance app that workers can actually supposedly use to alert the HR. But HR is able to have a functionality in the app which helps them to hide complaints. And how does that really work? What is this performance of accountability, which is not really accountability? Similar issues are there even in urban company. And there is also this, like, passing the buck to the algorithm, where the managerial staff of the platforms can also claim, refuge that we don't understand how the algorithm works. We are not able to control it. But entirely, this is not really true, right? Because this is a designed environment and there are particular choices, and human and algorithmic management combinations only exist in the way automated systems work. And when you look at the gap today in addressing this, if you look at the four pieces of legislation, Rajasthan, Karnataka, Telangana, and Jharkhand, only Karnataka's legislation acknowledges automated monitoring and the need for transparency in algorithms, and there is a limited right where workers have to request information. Nonetheless, there are critical gaps in the here where the provision for algorithmic transparency, I think all of us must continue our work in order to ensure the downstream rules and mechanisms are able to address clear mechanisms to challenge fairness of algorithmic decisions, challenges by workers for random like behavior of algorithms. No, and the right to compensation or redress in case the algorithm unfairly penalize the worker, a due process for algorithmic challenges, and the entire idea that when platforms change the terms of work through just an arbitrary update or change in algorithm management, this must be seen as a change in the terms of work. And this is something where union representatives must be consulted or the welfare board must be consulted. Like, it's important to actually see this. And this is a very important area in order to ensure that we are able to claim and reclaim the entire standards of decent work in platform work environments. I'll just take 5 more minutes. Coming to my final set of points, in terms of policy proposals, what are some directions where we can learn from other contexts? What is it that we can, do here? One of the biggest learnings that we can have from the debate in Europe, there two things are not perfect, but the debate is a little bit ahead, so it helps us to avoid making the same mistakes and also learn partially from what is working. The entire idea that a platform is a neutral environment where the worker is a partner, this has been challenged successfully in Europe, where Europe's platform work directive recognizes that it is the duty is on the platforms to rebut the claim of employment status. By default, the European legislation assumes that every platform worker is an employee of the platform company because the algorithmic management system is nothing other than the typical management system in a conventional labor or employment arrangement. So this is a very, very important precedent that we must also draw on. And I'm sure Shaikh Bhai can talk more about this because IFAT has also challenged the fact that platform workers are denied employment status, and there is a court challenge, and maybe he would be able to talk more about it in the Indian context. The second point is actually about how, when you look at accountability, it's not just individualized and case-by-case transparency measures we need. It's not just about the fact that if one worker is affected, they can file a grievance. Or the point actually is that there has to be a worker representative oversight mechanism for any design changes or the primary design basis of platform work environments. We also need public algorithm repositories, ex ante and ex post audit of algorithm obligations, which are seen as the legitimate rights of labor authorities to actually engage in public scrutiny, and the rights of union representatives to demand this for public scrutiny as well. Last but not the least, there was a point in the beginning that this entire problem we cannot fix until we change and challenge the business model of the platform economy. So this entire idea of how there is a price gouging and there is a particular monopoly tactic that platforms employ. To give you the latest example, in Karnataka, last week, milk producers are in uproar because Flipkart wants to sell milk here at 1 rupee per day. So this is because there is like a deep, endless pocket in a platform company, and the platform company can engage in complete price distortionary practices, and the deep pockets and venture capital allow them to make loss for a long time till they actually corner and foreclose the entire market. So what is the competition regulation we need in this context? This is something very, very important to see. And similarly, it's also important to look at alternative platform infrastructures on digital commons backbones, which is also one part of the session we are supposed to address. Can there be a new platform cooperativism or an alternative imagination of a worker-centric platform? Since 2021, IT for Change has been working with the social enterprise LaborNet in order to design a blueprint for a women worker-centric labor platform in the beauty services. So this is the idea that if beauty workers designed, let's say, urban company, that's a labor platform that served their own interest, how would the design choices look different? There are many things here. So we did techno design workshops with the workers themselves, and there are these ideas that workflows, workers want to self-manage workflows through personal dashboards, order history, earning summaries. They want flexibility and not this precarized flexibility where they want to be able to choose the slots they will work in advance without nudges or penalties. They don't want distortory commission structures. Then they want safety features that if you are a woman beauty worker and your workplace is somebody else's home, there are additional risks of like sexual harassment and things like that, right? And what would be the particular protocols for emergency? And then support and feedback. So real-time feedback that is meaningful rather than rating systems. Now the difficulty here is for a design blueprint is ready. LaborNet also has found some capital to take this forward. But when you tell customers in cities that they have to be verified before they are onboarded onto the platform, because we also have to ensure that customers have to be verified so they don't pose a risk to the workers, there is a lot of resistance. There is also the difficulty that a platform like this, even if it works in multiple Indian cities, how will it find a market niche and move customers away from models like urban company, whose deep pockets enable them to attract customers with limitless, kind of pricing decisions and things like this. How can we support these initiatives? What policy measures do we need? Could we learn from settings like Spain and Barcelona, where there have been these things, which we can discuss later if there is a time? There are many, many ways to take this forward. And in conclusion, I will just say that what is important here is the entire design of the platform economy must change. We need to look at both the political organizing, our logical demands emanating from that in terms of ensuring policy puts worker first. And we also need to look at alternative economic models and the technology commons backbones we need for that. I'll just stop here. I look forward to listening to all of you.
Thank you so much, Nandini, and very happy to really hear about. Thank you. Round of applause for both our speakers, actually. And thank you for taking us through that, because we also got the perspective, or we got the kind of mechanisms of control that are deployed by these platform companies and used to control and monitor, surveil the movement of workers. And I'm sure this is done to have implications on their political activities or their organizing, for example. So thank you for showing us that perspective. And really, really big thank you for the conclusion of your speech, where you mentioned on the alternative imaginations of these platform companies, because we have actually, in the room we have with us Mr. Shaktiman Ghosh as well, who has been for 60 years leading the struggles of street vendors. And we were discussing a couple of days ago whether there is a possibility of joining street vendors or having a specific app for street vendors, platform for street vendors to further their business. So some very good suggestions have come in, these alternative ideas that we can imagine, examples from Spain, like you mentioned, and very happy to hear that IT for Change is developing this blueprint for women workers app as well. I think we could really, we don't just get the challenges and the struggles in this session, but we also can possibly view an alternative future. So really thank you to both of you for that. Without taking any more time, because we need to break into lunch soon, I will open the room for questions. Okay, 1, 2. This person here, right here in this row, and then okay, 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Nandini and Sheikh, is it okay? मतलब एक समय पे 2-3 सवाल लें फिर, है ना? So let's take 3 questions and then come back to you. Yes, please.
शेख जी, धन्यवाद है आपका इतना गिग वर्कर्स के बारे में इतना डिटेल में बात आपने किया है। तो मेरा क्वेश्चन, टर्म्स एंड कंडीशंस जो एप्स आप वर्कर्स को देते हैं ना, पर्टिकुलरली स्विगी, फोकसिंग ऑन स्विगी एंड जोमेटो, तो वो कंपनीज कितना इस इन टर्म्स और कंडीशंस को फॉलो करते हैं? और मुझे एक और फॉलोअप चाहिए, जो 5 स्टेट्स के बारे में आपने कहा था ना, कानून बना है 5 स्टेट्स में, तो उसका रिजल्ट क्या हो रहा है? कर्नाटक के बारे में आपने बताया है, पर्टिकुलरली राजस्थान के बारे में जो एक बोर्ड सेट किया है ना, तो उसके बारे में मुझे जानना चाहिए। और नंदिनी मैम से मेरा क्वेश्चन ये था, आपने डिजिटल कॉमन्स के बारे में यहाँ पर बता दिया। So in this digital commons, I want to know specifically about data, how data is going to be managed, because as Sheikh sir has mentioned, there needs to be a platform where companies, workers, government, states, representatives, as well as civil society holders should, form together to create change in this field. So how data is going to be very much important here, and how private companies could be incorporated in this digital common platforms. So these were my 2 questions.
थैंक यू सर। मेरा नाम शिवा है, भुवनेश्वर उड़ीसा से। सर जो बात रख रहे थे अभी, यहाँ पे हमारा जो बोर्ड है, 2 बोर्ड है, कंस्ट्रक्शन वर्कर के लिए एक बोर्ड है, अनऑर्गेनाइज्ड वर्कर के लिए एक बोर्ड है। वो पहले क्या था, कंस्ट्रक्शन वर्कर बोर्ड पे सारे स्कीम जो है अवेलेबल है, मैरिज बेनिफिट हो, एजुकेशन हो, सब कुछ है। लेकिन जो अनऑर्गेनाइज्ड बोर्ड पे हैं, उनके लिए डेथ बेनिफिट के छोड़ के और एक्सीडेंट बेनिफिट छोड़ के कुछ नहीं है। पहले क्या था कि आफ्टर कोविड there are no gig worker at the this platform, but we advocates जैसे advocacy करने के बाद वो अभी 2 साल पहले वो उनको उस प्लेटफॉर्म पे लिए हैं। लेकिन हम कैसे उनको वो जो स्कीम है कंस्ट्रक्शन वर्कर बोर्ड में जैसे स्कीम है, उनको कैसे जोड़ें, उस जो प्लेटफॉर्म के वर्कर है उनको कैसे जोड़ें, वही मेरा क्वेश्चन था। थैंक यू।
नमस्कार, मेरा नाम त्रिदेव है और मैं दिल्ली से हूँ। मेरा सवाल यह है कि गिग इकोनॉमी में वर्कर को इंडिपेंडेंट बोला जाता है, कंट्रोल प्लेटफॉर्म के पास होता है, तो रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी किसकी होनी चाहिए? कंपनीज की, गवर्नमेंट्स की या वर्कर्स की?
थैंक यू। अभी ठीक है, एक और सवाल ले लेते हैं, है ना, एंड देन ओवर। हाँ,
मेरा सवाल रहेगा कि अभी ये जो 4 लेबर कानून मोदी गवर्नमेंट लेके आई है, कैन यू सेटिस्फाइज, आप उससे सहमत हैं या असहमत हैं करंटली?
ले लेते हैं, ठीक है। 2-3 और क्वेश्चन। एक ठीक है,
सलाउद्दीन भाई, क्या आपका जो यूनियन है वो ट्रेड यूनियन रजिस्ट्रेशन है क्या, या मेंबरशिप बेस है क्या? सेकंड है, जो टर्नओवर आपने कभी कोशिश किया था, जो टोटल आपका टर्नओवर क्या है उसको निकालना, जो हमारे इकोनॉमिक में कितना बड़ा हिस्सा है वो दिखाने के, जैसा हम लोग स्ट्रीट वेंडर में दिखाया, जो हर रोज की टर्नओवर 8,000 करोड़ रुपया है, तो इसी तरीका से गिग वर्कर का एक एक सेक्टर को पकड़ के उनका टर्नओवर क्या है, जो हमारे इकोनॉमिक में कितना जगह कवर करते हैं, देश की जीडीपी में कितना जगह कवर करते हैं, ये बहुत एसेंशियल है मुझे लगा।
Thank you so much for this enriching session. As it was, the resource person were from very different backgrounds. One shared the lived experiences of the gig workers, and another one shared the academic and theoretical insights with us. So I think this balanced approach of the both the resource persons helped us in understanding the ground realities and then link it with it the conceptual frameworks. My question is that in current scenario, what we are seeing, the ground realities of gig workers, should our focus be on formalizing this sector, or on formalizing this sector, or on helping securing this rights and dignity of the gig workers in informality in itself? That is my question. So.
Sorry, you wanted to continue? No? Okay. Thank you. No more questions. Sorry, we are pressed for time, but maybe we can upstage par aa jaiye, please. Maybe Nandini, you can start and then we can conclude with Sheikh. Is that all right? Nandini, are you able to hear me?
तो मैं बोलूंगा नो क्लोज कर।
We are not able to hear you. We'll just check our system. I will request one of the volunteers to check and then we'll come back to you once. Hanji, please, Sheikh.
देखिए, टर्म्स एंड कंडीशंस की जहां तक बात है, वो डिजिटल टर्म्स एंड कंडीशंस है। जितने भी प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज है, सारे ओला, उबर, स्विगी, जोमेटो, अमेजॉन, जो भी है, जैसे कि कभी भी एक चीज के अंदर एक बंधन होता, अगर जब हर चीज का एक रूल्स एंड रेगुलेशन जब भी बनता, चाहे मैं आपसे काम करो या कोई दुकानदार से करो या मालिक से करो, कहीं पे भी एक रिलेशन कनेक्ट बोलते सो रहता। पर यहाँ पे जो है आई अग्रीड बोल के आप एक बार बटन दबा देने से आपका मेरा बंधन शुरू हो गया। मगर वो अग्रीमेंट में 50 पेपर का अग्रीमेंट आप खोल के पढ़ के देखेंगे तो आपको भी लॉ स्टूडेंट्स जैसा लॉ पढ़ के एडवोकेट्स है, बड़े बड़े जो हमारे केस के अंदर अभी लड़ रहे लॉयर्स है, उन लोग भी सर खुजा रहे कि ये ऐसे कैसे टर्म्स पकड़ के लाए, ये ऐसे कैसे शब्द पकड़ के लाए, वो शब्द को कोई मानी नहीं मिल रही डिक्शनरी में। तो इस तरीके से प्रोफेशनली उन लोग ने टर्म्स एंड कंडीशंस बनाए, वो वर्कर्स के एक्सेसिबल नहीं है। और ये सारे पहले हाई इंग्लिश में रहते थे, अभी हम लोग ने लड़ते लड़ते इसको लोकल लैंग्वेज में ट्रांसलेट करके देने का वादा किया, और वो भी फिजिकल नहीं दे रहे, बस आई एग्रीड बोल के बटन दबाने पे वहां पे दिख रहा। मगर पढ़ने का पूरा मौका देना चाहिए, जैसा अभी कानून के अंदर आप देखे तो दिखता आपको कि यहाँ पे पूरा आपको एग्रीमेंट दे के आप एग्रीमेंट पढ़े बाद में साइन करना है। दूसरी बात, जो 5 स्टेटों में जो कानून बना, ये कानून अभी पूरे तरीके से पारित एक ही स्टेट में हुआ, बाकी के स्टेट्स में सब इंटरनल प्रॉब्लम्स है। प्रॉब्लम्स माने कहीं सरकार बदल गई तो कहीं सरकार है अभी संभलने में है। तो जैसा झारखंड है, झारखंड इलेक्शन के बैक आके कानूनी तौर पे पूरा रेडी होके, मैं अभी आपको स्टार्टिंग में एक बात बोला था, एक सेंट्रल पे भी एक प्रेशर है स्टेट गवर्नमेंट पे, आप रुको हम दे रहे, तो वो कहीं ना कहीं उसमें थोड़े स्टेट्स रुके हैं। मगर जो वादे के खिलाफ पूरा करने के स्टेट्स में कर्नाटक पहले निकल के आ गया। कर्नाटक जो है रिसेंटली लास्ट मंथ में भी बोर्ड मीटिंग, पहला बोर्ड मीटिंग उन्होंने कामयाबी से पूरा किया। बाकी के स्टेट्स अभी ऑन प्रोसेस है, ऑन ट्रैक पे है। दूसरा, वेलफेयर बोर्ड की बात जहां तक है, देखिए बहुत सारे देश के अंदर बहुत सारे वेलफेयर बोर्ड्स अपने पास है, मगर क्या वो वेलफेयर बोर्ड के पास एक्सेस इतना है कि आम आदमी जाके उसके बेनिफिट उठा पाए? नहीं है। बीच में दलाल है, कोई एक उसका एक पैरवीकार है कि उसके थ्रू आप जाके उसका बेनिफिट ले पाए। जैसा बीओसीडब्ल्यू का आप ले लेंगे, बिल्डिंग एंड कंस्ट्रक्शन वर्कर्स का, आधा तो बोकस बोर्ड के अंदर पूरे लोग हैं। मगर एक चीज आप लोगों को बताना चाह रहा हूं, अगर जब आप लोग यहाँ पे वर्कर्स को हेल्प कर रहेंगे बीओसीडब्ल्यू के अंदर, उसके अंदर गिग वर्कर को भी आप इंक्लूड कर सकते। जैसे कि आपके होम बेस्ड वर्कर्स के अंदर इंस्टा पे जो लोग इलेक्ट्रिशियन प्लम्बर जो काम कर रहे, उन लोग को आप वहां पे जो है रजिस्ट्रेशन करा के BOCW का बेनिफिट दिला सकते। ये बहुत सारे जनों को पता नहीं है, बट ये चीज हमें अवेयर करने की जरूरत है। हम तो एज ए यूनियंस अवेयर कर रहे, बट हमारी रीच भी बहुत कम है, इतनी रीच नहीं है, क्योंकि हम लोग फाइनेंशियली और मीडियाली जो क्या बोलते हैं सोशल मीडिया, उसमें अभी बहुत कमज़ोर है। हम उतनी ताकत नहीं है जितनी प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी का रीच है वो है। तो हम पूरी कोशिश कर रहे कि हम सारा रीच बना सके। ये तो एक नया पहल है ना, और ये वर्कर्स कहीं पे भी एक जगह मिलने वाले नहीं है, मूविंग ऑन द अर्थ, ये घूमते रहते फिरते रहते, तो इनको ऑर्गेनाइज करना ही सबसे बड़ा टफ चैलेंज है यूनियंस के लिए। तो फिर भी हम लोग थोड़ा बहुत ऑर्गेनाइज कर रहे, लड़ रहे, यहाँ तक तो आए, और आगे भी इसके ऊपर लड़ेंगे। गीग इकोनॉमी के अंदर देखिए, प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी का और यूनियन का और साथ ही साथ गवर्नमेंट का इतनी ही भागीदारी है, ट्राइपार्टेट, ये हम सबकी जिम्मेदारी है। इकोनॉमी के अंदर मैं ये नहीं बोल सकता हूँ कि सिर्फ एक गवर्नमेंट की जिम्मेदारी है हर चीज़ पे, एक सिर्फ प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी की जिम्मेदारी है, एक यूनियन की जिम्मेदारी है। हम सबकी उतनी ही जिम्मेदारी है जितनी आम लोग की है, वर्कर की है। हम लोग वर्कर को रिप्रेजेंट करते हैं, उनकी हक की बात को जो है, उनकी आवाज़ को जो है प्लेटफॉर्म तक और सरकार तक लेके जाने का काम करते हैं। सरकार की जिम्मेदारी है कि इनके प्रॉब्लम्स को सुने, प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनी से बातचीत करें और रिजॉल्व करें, और प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज को भी उनकी इकोनॉमी में ये सारे चीज को बेहतर बना के अगर जो उनके प्लेटफॉर्म्स बेटर कर सके, तो प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज का फ्यूचर बन सकता वहां पर। और दूसरी बात, 4 कोडों के अंदर मेरा कोई अभी उस पर कॉमेंट नहीं है, क्योंकि उसके अंदर कहीं ना कहीं एक चीज में गिग और प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर का थोड़ा बहुत फायदा मिल रहा, बट मैं ये नहीं कह सकता हूँ कि हम उनके साथ नहीं है जो ट्रेड यूनियंस लगातार 4 कोड्स पे लड़ रहे, हम उनके भी साथ है, बट गिग और प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर को इसमें कहीं ना कहीं थोड़ा एक राहत मिली, और कहीं ना कहीं थोड़ी एक ईमानदारी से उनको थोड़ा हक मिलने का काम हुआ। यस, यूनियन रजिस्ट्रेशन बना अंडर द ट्रेड यूनियन एक्ट में, चाहे इंडियन फेडरेशन ऐप बेस्ड ट्रांसपोर्ट वर्कर्स हो, तेलंगाना गिग एंड प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर्स यूनियन हो, ये यूनियन रजिस्ट्रेशन बनाने में भी बहुत सारे दिक्कतें आई। और यहाँ पे संदीप भाई को मालूम था कि हम लोग कईयों साल, 4-5 साल तो यूनियन प्रोसेस करने में टाइम लगा। तो मैं संदीप भाई कभी भी मिलते थे, यही बात करते थे कि यूनियन बना या नहीं अभी तक रजिस्ट्रेशन आपका, कहाँ तक प्रोसेस आया। तो फाइनली 2020 में तेलंगाना गिग एंड प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर्स यूनियन पहला यूनियन रजिस्टर हुआ देश के अंदर, जो गिग और प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर को ऑर्गेनाइज करने का। और फाइनली डिजिटल पे और डेटा पे, GDP पे शायद नंदिनी जी इस पे जवाब कमेंट करेंगे। थैंक यू।
Yes, Nandini, over to you, please.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, now very well. Go ahead.
Okay. So I just wanted to say a couple of things. So to begin with this digital and data point, I think what is clear to everybody is that in a platform work arrangement, when the worker does his labor, that is when data gets generated. But very ironically, all these data footprints of workers, that's actually being aggregated by the platform owner in order to capture more and more value and turn the condition of work against the worker, right? So when we look at this, in order to answer the specific question on what data governance proposals should we look at, one thing at IT for Change we have been kind of thinking about and stressing a long time is that we need to do two kinds of things. One is actually to talk about what kinds of data collection, aggregation, and use for behavior nudging and profiling should absolutely not be allowed on a platform. So there are some parts for which algorithmic management cannot do certain things. Stopping this abuse of data power is a very, very urgent issue. And I've already spoken about that earlier in the presentation with the examples. So I will not go into that again. But the second thing is, when we want to now talk about when you have this collective worker data footprint as an aggregate data resource, who does this belong to? So I don't think we should go for proposals like trying to say, let us monetize the worker for the data we collect and things like that, because that will not be in the workers' interest. To use an analogy, in the initial days of social media, there were many people who had made proposals about can we get like, a share in the advertising profit from all the behavioral data that Facebook uses, where every consumer gets data kind of share or something like that. This would amount to something like, some grand total of $4 per consumer or something. And more egregiously, what you would have lost by signing away your right on how data was reused, the penalty or cost of that would be tremendous. Instead, I think what we need is a commons-based approach. So in the commons-based approach, we recognize that when you look at the algorithmic management system and the data behavior in it, workers have a collective right to decide how this is being used to change the worker environment. Just like the trade union movement has taught us that any particular change in work conditions, this is something that a union has a right to intervene and negotiate. The same thing goes for even mainstream platforms. When we try to build alternative platform experiments, I feel ideally there should be these stewardship mechanisms that are constructed. We have not reached so far, even in our own initial, baby steps at IT for Change on this, because these things take time. When you have to think about what would be an alternative model, how would you sustain it? But yes, but technically, the short answer to this is that there should be data stewardship arrangements, because this is, to use a parallel, nothing other than a new cooperativism we need. From the cooperative movement, we have many lessons about how workers can control the means of production. The same thing when data is a means of production, we need to extend those lessons, and a lot of work remains to be done here. I had one final point as well, that when we are looking at these questions of the gig economy and the future of work, this is not just limited to a few workers on labor platforms. Today, I think everybody is at the risk of becoming a gig worker tomorrow. If you look at what is happening in even so-called, high-end knowledge work, like what will happen to engineers when Claude Copilot's next iteration takes away certain software jobs? You would again have to just be a gig worker applying for a job to test the Copilot or to work on an agentic AI service and things like that, right? So this massive shift in the labor market that will happen, I feel we need to think about what is the preparedness we need for that and demand a future of work that is meaningful and guarantees dignity to us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think a big round of applause for both Nandini and Sheikh. All right. Thank you both very, very much. And thank you to our lovely cohort for your incisive questions. And with that, we would like to close this session. Before शेख जी आपके जाने से पहले हम आपको एक छोटा सा तोहफा देना चाहेंगे, प्लीज वापस आ जाइए. मैं संदीप चाचा जी से अनुरोध करूंगी कि आके और डॉक्टर एस्थर मरिया सेल्वम दोनों मिलकर, अगर ये चाय जो है वायनाड से आई है और हमारी एक महिला एंटरप्राइज यूनिट है जिन्होंने ये दिया है. Nandini she has dropped. उनको मैं उनको पोस्ट कर देंगे, उनका शायद ड्रॉप हो गया. I'll just connect with her. हाँ, Instamart